The church doors slammed shut behind her like a coffin lid closing. Mara Whitlock stood at the altar in a dress that squeezed the breath from her lungs, staring at a man whose face twisted in disgust the moment he saw her. In 3 seconds, he would destroy her in front of everyone. In 3 seconds, her worst nightmare would come true. But what happened next? When a scarred stranger rose from the shadows and spoke 2 words that changed everything, would shake this brutal frontier town to its core. Stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The corset strings cut into Mara's ribs like razor wire. Suck in, her mother hissed, yanking the laces tighter with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. You want him running the moment he sees you? Mara couldn't answer. The air had already left her lungs. She braced herself against the bedpost in the cramped boarding house room, fingers digging into wood worn smooth by desperate hands before hers. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of voices gathering in the street below. The whole damn town, it sounded like, come to watch Black Hollow's charity case finally get married off. I said suck in. Another vicious pull. Mara's vision spotted at the edges. The mirror across the room showed her what she'd always seen, a round face flushed with shame, a body that took up too much space no matter how much her mother tried to compress it, eyes that had learned long ago not to expect kindness. That's as good as it's getting, her mother muttered, tying off the strings with a final brutal tug. Try not to breathe too deep during the ceremony, and for Christ's sake, smile. You look like you're going to a funeral. Maybe I am, Mara thought, but she kept her mouth shut. Speaking only made things worse. Her mother circled her like a rancher inspecting damaged livestock, lips pressed into a thin line of perpetual disappointment. Martha Whitlock had been beautiful once. The faded daguerreotype on the dresser proved it. But 15 years of frontier life and one too many bottles had carved her beauty into something sharp and mean. The dress helps, she said finally, though her tone suggested it was barely enough. At least it covers most of you. When you walk down that aisle, keep your shoulders back and your chin up. Don't shuffle like you usually do. And when Tobias says his vows, you look grateful, understand? This is the only chance you're ever going to get. Mara's hands trembled as she smoothed the ivory fabric over her hips. The dress was borrowed, like everything else in her life, taken from the church charity box and hastily altered by women who whispered behind their hands about whether any amount of fabric could make her presentable. I don't even know him, Mara whispered. I've never even seen his face. You don't need to know him. Martha moved to the window, peering down at the crowd gathering around the church across the street. Tobias Garrett is a rancher with 300 acres and a house that doesn't leak. That's all you need to know. He asked the sheriff to find him a wife, and by some miracle, the sheriff thought of you. Miracle. The word tasted like ash. Mara knew exactly what kind of miracle it was, the kind that happened when a man was desperate enough to overlook a woman's appearance in exchange for the labor she could provide, the kind that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with transaction. What if he... Mara started, then stopped. The question was too dangerous to finish. What if he what? Martha spun around, eyes flashing. Changes his mind? Decides you're not worth the trouble? Then you'd better pray he doesn't, because if this falls through, you're done in this town. Hell, you're already done. This is your last chance to be anything other than a burden I have to feed. The words hit like fists, but Mara had developed calluses where those particular blows landed. She'd been hearing variations of the same message since she was 12 years old, since her body had started changing in ways that made the other girls whisper and the boys laugh. Since she'd realized that in a place like Black Hollow, a woman's worth was measured in beauty and childbearing potential, and she apparently had neither. A knock at the door made them both jump. "It's time," a man's voice called. The sheriff, probably, come to escort her to her own execution. Martha straightened Mara's veil with rough hands. "Remember what I said. Smile. Be grateful. And for God's sake, don't cry. You'll make your face even more of a mess." The walk from the boarding house to the church took 3 minutes. It felt like 3 hours. The July sun beat down mercilessly on Black Hollow's main street, turning the dirt to dust that clung to Mara's borrowed dress. Sheriff Walker led the way, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. Behind her, Martha followed in grim silence, occasionally adjusting Mara's veil like a butcher arranging a cut of meat for display. People lined the street, and they weren't subtle about their staring. Lord have mercy, someone muttered. That's the bride? Poor bastard. Heard Garrett's half blind. Only explanation. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mara kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, on the white church at the end of the street with its crooked steeple and sun-bleached doors. Her face burned, but she didn't cry. She'd promised herself that much, at least. They could have her humiliation, her shame, her entire ruined life, but they couldn't have her tears. Not in public, not where they could see. The church doors loomed before her, already open, revealing the darkness inside. Mara could see shapes moving in the shadows. The congregation, packed into the pews like spectators at a hanging. The organ wheezed to life, playing a wedding march that sounded more like a funeral dirge. Head up, Sheriff Walker said, not unkindly. He was one of the few people in Black Hollow who'd never been overtly cruel to her, though whether that was decency or indifference, Mara couldn't say. It'll be over quick. That's what I'm afraid of, Mara thought. They paused at the threshold. Martha adjusted the veil one last time, then stepped aside. The sheriff offered his arm. Mara's father had died when she was 6, shot in a mining accident that left Martha bitter and broke, and she took it with shaking hands. Ready? He asked. No, she would never be ready, but she nodded anyway because what choice did she have? The organ music swelled. The congregation turned to stare. And Mara Whitlock walked into the church to meet the man who'd agreed to marry her sight unseen. The interior of the church was stifling. Every pew was packed with bodies, and the July heat turned the space into an oven. Mara could feel sweat gathering under the corset, making the fabric stick to her skin. The aisle stretched before her like the barrel of a rifle, and at the far end, illuminated by dusty shafts of sunlight falling through the high windows, stood a man, Tobias Garrett. He had his back to her, talking to the preacher in low, urgent tones. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and dark hair slicked back with too much pomade. He wore a black suit that looked new, the kind of thing a man bought when he wanted to make an impression. Mara forced herself to keep walking. Left foot, right foot. The borrowed shoes pinched, but she barely felt it. All her attention was locked on the man who was about to become her husband, trying to glean something, anything, from the rigid set of his shoulders. The congregation watched in silence. No one whispered congratulations or blessed the union. They just stared, waiting for whatever spectacle was about to unfold. 10 feet from the altar, Tobias turned around. The first thing Mara saw was his face, angular and weathered, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of creek water. Not ugly, not kind either, just assessing. Looking at her the way a rancher might look at a horse, checking for soundness, weighing value against cost. The second thing she saw was his expression change. It happened in stages, like watching a door slam shut. His eyes widened slightly as they traveled over her, taking in the round face, the soft chin, the body that the corset and dress couldn't fully disguise. His jaw tightened. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, curled into fists. And then his face twisted into something that made Mara's stomach drop through the floor. Disgust. Pure, undisguised revulsion. No, Tobias said. His voice carried through the church like a gunshot. Absolutely not. Mara froze. The sheriff's arm tensed beneath her hand, but he didn't move forward. The organ music stuttered and died. In the sudden silence, Mara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, a frantic rhythm that matched the panic clawing its way up her throat. Mr. Garrett, the preacher said carefully, perhaps we should— I said no. Tobias took a step backward, putting more distance between himself and Mara, as if she were something contagious. This is— Jesus Christ, this is what you brought me? This is the woman I'm supposed to marry? The congregation erupted into whispers. Mara felt the weight of 100 stares boring into her back, felt the heat rising in her face until it felt like her skin might catch fire. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the earth to crack open and swallow her whole. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there, rooted to the spot, as Tobias's face grew redder and his voice grew louder. I asked for a wife, he snarled, jabbing a finger at Sheriff Walker. Someone who could work a ranch, bear children, keep a house. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? The word that hit Mara like a physical blow. Not her, not even she. Just that. A thing. An object. Something less than human. Now hold on, Sheriff Walker started, but Tobias cut him off. You said she was plain. You said she was sturdy and healthy. And this? He gestured wildly at Mara, his disgust so palpable it seemed to fill the entire church. She can barely fit into that dress. How's she supposed to work a ranch when she can't even control her own appetite? How's she supposed to... That's enough. The voice came from the back of the church, cutting through Tobias's tirade like a knife through butter. It was quiet but sharp, carrying an authority that made everyone, including Tobias, turn to look. A man stood in the last pew, half hidden in shadow. Mara couldn't make out his features, but she could see his outline. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his face. He hadn't been sitting there when she walked in, or if he had, she hadn't noticed him. "Who the hell are you?" Tobias demanded. The stranger didn't answer. He just stepped into the aisle and started walking toward the altar with slow, measured steps that echoed in the silence. As he moved through the shafts of sunlight, Mara caught glimpses of him. Worn boots, faded denim, a leather vest over a dark shirt. Working clothes. Rancher's clothes, but not new or fancy like Tobias's suit. "I asked you a question," Tobias said, puffing up his chest. The stranger stopped about 6 feet away. He was older than Tobias, early 30s maybe, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same hard stone as the mountains surrounding Black Hollow. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pale against sun-darkened skin. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they fixed on Tobias with an intensity that made the other man shift his weight. "Cole Bennett," the stranger said simply. His voice had the rough quality of someone who didn't use it often. "And you need to shut your mouth." A collective gasp went through the congregation. In Black Hollow, where men settled disputes with fists and bullets, those were fighting words. But Tobias, for all his bluster, seemed to recognize something in Cole Bennett that made him hesitate. He opened his mouth, closed it, then found his courage again. "This is none of your business, Bennett. This is between me and... You made it everyone's business when you decided to humiliate her in front of the whole town," Cole said. His eyes flicked to Mara for just a second, a brief measuring glance, then back to Tobias. "You want to back out of the contract, fine, but you do it respectful." "Respectful?" Tobias let out a harsh laugh. "You want me to be respectful to that? Look at her, she's..." He didn't get to finish. Cole moved fast, faster than a man his size should be able to move, and suddenly his hand was gripping the front of Tobias's new suit, pulling him up onto his toes. "I said," Cole repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "shut your mouth." For a moment, the church held its breath. Mara watched, frozen in horror and strange fascination, as Tobias's face went from red to white to purple. His hands came up to claw at Cole's grip, but the older man didn't budge. "Mr. Bennett," Sheriff Walker said, moving forward with his hand hovering near his gun belt. "That's enough. Let him go." Cole held on for another 3 seconds. Mara counted them, then released Tobias with enough force to send him stumbling backward. Tobias caught himself on the altar rail, gasping, his fancy suit rumpled and his pomade-slicked hair falling across his forehead. "You're insane," Tobias spat. "You're all insane if you think I'm marrying it." "Then don't," Sheriff Walker interrupted wearily. He'd seen enough drama for one day, apparently. "But there's still a contract to fulfill. The town paid good money to bring Miss Whitlock here, and somebody's got to make it right." "That's not my problem," Tobias said, straightening his jacket with shaking hands. "I'm not marrying her. I don't care what the contract says." "Then someone else will." The sheriff's words hung in the air like smoke. Mara felt her stomach clench. This was it. The moment where they'd auction her off to the highest bidder, or the lowest, or whoever was desperate enough to take her. The moment where whatever dignity she had left would be stripped away completely. "We'll sweeten the deal," the sheriff continued, addressing the congregation. "Whoever marries Miss Whitlock gets 50 acres of state land, 10 head of cattle, and a timber permit. That's more than fair compensation for taking damaged goods," someone called from the pews. Laughter rippled through the church. Mara wanted to die. She wanted to melt into the floorboards and never exist again. Her vision blurred, and she realized with horror that she was about to cry, about to break her promise to herself and give them exactly what they wanted to see. "Any takers?" the sheriff asked, scanning the congregation. Silence. "Come on now. It's a good deal. Land, cattle, timber rights, and..." More silence. Mara could feel them all looking at her, weighing her against the offered rewards and finding her lacking. Not worth it. Not even for 50 acres and cattle. Not even for, "I'll do it!" The voice came from behind her. Cole Bennett's voice, quiet but clear. The church erupted into chaos. Everyone started talking at once, their voices rising in shock and confusion and disbelief. Mara spun around, too fast, the corset making her dizzy, and found Cole standing there, his dark eyes fixed on some point above her head. "You'll what?" Sheriff Walker said, clearly as stunned as everyone else. "I'll marry her," Cole repeated. "Right now. Today. You—" The sheriff struggled for words. "Mr. Bennett, do you understand what you're agreeing to? This is a legal marriage contract, binding, permanent." "I understand." "And you want the land? The cattle?" "No." That single word cut through the noise like a blade. The congregation fell silent again, confusion replacing shock. "No?" the sheriff echoed. "Don't want your land, don't want your cattle. Don't want anything except to finish this ceremony and get out of here." Mara stared at him, trying to understand. Men didn't do things like this. Men didn't volunteer to marry women like her without compensation, without reason, without something in it for them. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. "Cole," someone said from the pews, an older man with a weathered face and concerned eyes. "Think about what you're doing, son. You don't know this girl. You don't owe her anything." "I know," Cole said simply. "Don't matter." "It matters plenty." The older man stood up, agitation clear in every line of his body. "You can't just— Sarah wouldn't want— Don't!" The single word came out like a whip crack. Cole's face had gone hard as granite, and his hand had moved to his belt, fingers curling around something Mara couldn't see. "Don't speak for her." The older man subsided, sinking back into his pew with a troubled expression. The church fell silent again, everyone watching Cole with a mixture of pity and confusion and, in some faces, anger. Sheriff Walker cleared his throat. "Miss Whitlock, are you agreeable to this arrangement?" Mara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Was she agreeable? To marrying a complete stranger who looked like he'd seen the wrong end of too many fights? A man who'd just assaulted someone in church and refused free land and cattle for reasons that made no sense at all? But what were her options? Go back to the boarding house with her mother and face whatever punishment waited there? Stay in Black Hollow as the woman who got rejected at the altar, the laughingstock of the territory? Spend the rest of her life as a burden, a charity case, a joke? Or take a chance on the scarred stranger with the dark eyes and the unreadable face? "Yes," Mara whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'm agreeable." "Well then." The sheriff looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "I suppose we have ourselves a wedding. Preacher?" The preacher, a thin man who'd been watching the proceedings with the air of someone witnessing a train wreck, cleared his throat and opened his Bible with trembling hands. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "to join this man and this woman in—" "Skip to the part where we say, 'I do,'" Cole interrupted. "No one here's in the mood for the long version." Nervous laughter rippled through the church. The preacher looked to the sheriff, who just shrugged. "Very well," the preacher said. "Cole Bennett, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." No hesitation, no pause, just two words spoken in that rough, quiet voice. "And do you, Mara Whitlock, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mara's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. The corset, the heat, the stairs, it all pressed down on her like a physical weight. But she forced the words out, pushed them past the fear and confusion and desperate, fragile hope. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of—" "Rings!" someone interrupted. Mara turned to see Martha pushing her way through the crowd, her face flushed with an emotion Mara couldn't read. Triumph? Relief? Her mother thrust two plain gold bands at the preacher. "Can't have a wedding without rings." The preacher took them, flustered. "Right. Of course. Mr. Bennett, if you'll place the ring on the bride's finger and repeat after me." Cole took the smaller ring. His hands were rough, scarred across the knuckles, with calluses that spoke of hard labor. He reached for Mara's left hand, and she gave it to him, watching as he slid the band onto her finger with surprising gentleness. "With this ring," the preacher prompted. "With this ring," Cole repeated, his eyes fixed on their joined hands. "I thee wed." The ring was too loose. It spun around Mara's finger, too big by at least 2 sizes. Of course it was. Nothing about this day was supposed to fit. "Miss Whitlock," the preacher said. Mara took the larger ring with shaking hands. Cole's left hand was extended toward her, palm down, and she noticed more scars there. A long one across his wrist, another across the back of his hand that looked like it had been deep once. She slid the ring on, fumbling slightly. "With this ring," she whispered, "I thee wed. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The preacher snapped his Bible shut, like he couldn't wait to be done with this circus. "You may kiss the bride." The words hung in the air. Mara's heart stopped. She hadn't thought about this part, hadn't let herself think about it. But now here it was, the moment where she'd have to press her lips against a stranger's while the whole town watched and waited for him to recoil in disgust. But Cole didn't move toward her. He just stood there, looking down at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "We don't have to," he said quietly enough that probably only Mara could hear. "If you don't want to." It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her all day. Maybe the first kind thing anyone had said to her in years. Something in Mara's chest cracked open, just a little. "It's all right," she whispered back. Cole nodded once. Then he leaned down. He was at least 6 inches taller than her, and pressed his lips to hers in the briefest, most chaste kiss imaginable. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. His lips were warm and dry, and he smelled like leather and wood smoke in the open range. Then it was over, and he was stepping back, and the congregation was offering scattered, half-hearted applause. "Congratulations," the preacher said, though he sounded like he was congratulating them on their own executions. "You're now husband and wife." Mara looked down at the ring on her finger. Too loose, too simple, too impossible to believe. Mrs. Bennett. Mara Bennett. A married woman. "We should go," Cole said. Not to the congregation, not to the preacher, just to her. Before anyone changes their mind. He was right. Mara could already see Tobias glaring at them from the altar, could feel the confusion and anger and jealousy radiating from the crowd. Whatever strange thing had just happened, it wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. Better to leave while they still could. Cole offered his arm. Mara took it, and together they walked back down the aisle. Past the staring faces, past her mother's inscrutable expression, past Sheriff Walker's troubled frown. Out into the blazing afternoon sun and the dusty street where people were already gathering to watch them go. A horse waited at the hitching post, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes and a patient stance. Next to it was a buckboard wagon loaded with supplies. "That's your horse?" Mara asked, finding her voice. "Ours now, I suppose," Cole said. He helped her up onto the wagon seat with those same scarred, gentle hands, then climbed up beside her. "Ranch is about 2 hours north. We'll get there before dark." 2 hours. North. Into the hills and away from Black Hollow and everything she'd ever known. Mara felt panic rising again, the reality of what she'd just done crashing down on her. She'd married a stranger. She was leaving with him. She had no idea what waited for her at the end of those 2 hours. Cole gathered the reins and the horse started forward. Behind them, Mara could hear voices rising, questions, speculation, cruel laughter. She didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. If she looked back, she might lose her nerve completely. "You all right?" Cole asked as they left the main street behind. "I don't know," Mara said honestly. "Are you going to tell me why you did that?" "Not yet." "Will you ever?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horse onto the northern trail that led up into the hills. Finally, "Maybe. When I figure out how to explain it." That should have scared her, should have sent every warning bell in her head clanging, but somehow it didn't. There was something in Cole's voice, not kindness exactly, but not cruelty either. Just honesty. Raw and uncomfortable, but honest. They rode in silence as Black Hollow disappeared behind them. The town looked smaller from up here, less imposing. Just a collection of wooden buildings squatting in the dust, full of small people living small, mean lives. Mara loosened the strings of her corset, gasping as air rushed back into her lungs. Cole glanced at her but didn't comment, just kept the horse moving at a steady pace. The hills rose around them, covered in scrub pine and sage. The air smelled cleaner here, away from the town's dust and smoke. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, Mara could hear running water. "It's beautiful," she said without thinking. "It's hard," Cole corrected. "Beautiful doesn't mean easy. You'll need to learn that quick if you're going to survive out here." "I'm stronger than I look." The words came out before Mara could stop them, defensive and sharp. But Cole just nodded. "I know," he said simply. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because you're still here," Cole said. "After everything that happened in that church, you're still here. You didn't run. You didn't break. You just kept standing." Mara had no answer for that. She watched the hills roll past, processing his words, trying to understand this man she'd just married. "The ranch," she said finally. "What's it like?" "Small. One-room cabin, couple of outbuildings, about 200 acres of grazing land. Creek runs through the south pasture. Good water, good grass. The work's hard, but the land's honest. It'll give back what you put in." "And what will you expect from me?" Cole's hands tightened on the reins. "I expect you to pull your weight, learn the work, do your share. I'm not looking for a servant, and I'm not looking for—" He stopped, jaw working. "I'm not looking for a bedmate. You'll have your own space, your own privacy. What happened in that church was a legal contract, nothing more. You understand?" Mara understood. Relief and something else, something she couldn't quite name, washed through her in equal measure. "I understand." Good. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, turning the hills golden. Mara watched the landscape change as they climbed, the scrub giving way to real pines, the air growing cooler and thinner. Once, she saw a hawk circling overhead, riding the thermals with lazy grace. "There," Cole said, pointing. Mara followed his finger and saw it. A valley opening up before them, green and lush compared to the dusty plains below. A creek did indeed run through it, sparkling in the sunlight, and in the center of the valley, surrounded by a simple fence, stood a cabin. It was small, like Cole had said. Log walls, shake roof, a chimney that needed repair. But it looked solid, sturdy, built to last. "It's not much," Cole said, and for the first time Mara heard something uncertain in his voice. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Cole glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. Then he nodded and urged the horse forward, down into the valley that was apparently now her home. As they approached the cabin, Mara noticed more details. A small garden plot, mostly overgrown with weeds. A barn that leaned slightly to one side but looked functional. Chickens scratching in the dirt, and in the corral, 3 more horses watching their approach with pricked ears. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. He jumped down, then offered his hand to help Mara down. She took it, grateful for the support. Her legs were shaking, from the ride, from the corset, from everything. "I'll show you around," Cole said. "Get you settled." The cabin interior was dim and sparse. One room, like he'd said, divided by function rather than walls. A fireplace dominated one end, with a rough table and 2 chairs nearby. A bed stood in the far corner, a real bed, with a frame and a mattress and blankets that looked clean. A few shelves held supplies, flour, coffee, dried beans, and in another corner, somewhat separate from the rest, was a smaller sleeping area with a cot and a trunk. "That's yours," Cole said, gesturing to the cot. "I'll take the bed. It's not much privacy, but—" "It's fine," Mara interrupted. "More than fine. Better than she'd expected." "Thank you." Cole nodded, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. He moved to the supplies on the wagon and started unloading, carrying sacks of flour and sugar inside with efficient movements. Mara helped, though the borrowed dress and loosened corset made everything awkward. Together they unloaded the wagon in silence, establishing a rhythm. It felt strange, working alongside a man she didn't know, but not unpleasant. Cole didn't bark orders or criticize her efforts. He just worked and expected her to do the same. When the wagon was empty, Cole unhitched the horse and led it to the corral. Mara watched from the cabin doorway, taking in her new home with eyes that still couldn't quite believe this was real. The sun was sinking toward the western hills, painting everything gold and orange. The evening air carried the smell of pine and creek water and earth. It was so quiet here. No shouting, no laughter, no whispers behind hands, just the wind in the trees and the chickens clucking and the horses moving peacefully in their corral. Cole returned from the barn and paused when he saw her standing there. "You hungry?" he asked. Mara realized she was. Starving, actually. She'd been too nervous to eat breakfast, and the wedding, if it could be called that, had happened around noon. Her stomach growled audibly. "I'll take that as a yes," Cole said. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and bacon." "I can cook," Mara said, "if you'll show me where everything is." Something shifted in Cole's expression. "You don't have to, I want to," Mara interrupted. And she did. She wanted to do something useful, something normal, something that would make her feel less like a burden and more like a person. Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll get the fire going." They worked together again, this time preparing a simple meal. Mara found a pan, bacon wrapped in cloth, dried beans that needed soaking. Cole built up the fire and filled a pot with water from a bucket by the door. They moved around each other carefully, like strangers learning a new dance. "Where does the water come from?" Mara asked, trying to fill the silence. "Creek. There's a spring about 50 yards that way." Cole gestured north. "Fresh and cold. Best water in the territory." "And the chickens? How many eggs do they give?" "Half dozen or so a day. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Depends on the season." They were talking about chickens and water. Mundane things. Safe things. But underneath the words, Mara could feel the real questions hovering, unasked. Why did you marry me? What do you want from me? What happens now? Cole put the bacon in the pan and set it over the fire. The smell that rose up was heavenly. Mara's stomach growled again. "There's bread in the chest," Cole said. "Should still be good." Mara found the bread, a little stale but edible. She sliced it while Cole tended the bacon, and when everything was ready, they sat down at the rough table together. "I should say grace," Mara said automatically, then stopped. She didn't know if Cole was religious, didn't know if it would offend him or bore him or... "If you want to," Cole said simply. So Mara closed her eyes and said a quick, simple prayer. When she opened them, Cole was watching her with that same unreadable expression. They ate in silence. The bacon was crispy and salt-rich. The bread soaked up the grease. It was the best meal Mara had eaten in years, though whether that was because of the food or the absence of her mother's criticism, she couldn't say. "Thank you," she said when her plate was empty, "for the meal, for everything." Cole stood and carried his plate to the wash bucket. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what the work's like." "What should I expect? Tomorrow?" "Chickens need feeding. Garden needs weeding. Fences need mending in the south pasture, and you'll need proper clothes. Can't work a ranch in a wedding dress." Mara looked down at the borrowed ivory fabric, already stained with dust and sweat. "I don't have anything else. There's some old shirts in the trunk. Belong to..." Cole stopped, jaw tightening. "They should fit well enough until we can get you something proper." Belong to who? Mara wondered, but she didn't ask. Whatever pain had just crossed Cole's face, she had no right to pry. "I should clean up," she said instead, gathering the dishes. "I'll get more water from the spring," Cole said, grabbing the buckets. "You can wash in the morning. It's getting dark." He was right. Outside the windows, the gold light had faded to purple. Mara could see stars beginning to emerge, more stars than she'd ever seen in town, where the smoke and lantern light washed them out. Cole left to get water, and Mara was alone in the cabin for the first time. She moved to her corner, her space, Cole had called it, and sank down onto the cot. It was thin but clean, with a wool blanket folded at the foot. The reality of her situation washed over her in waves. She was married. She was miles from town. She was alone with a man she didn't know, in a place she'd never seen before. She should be terrified. But somehow, she wasn't. Tired, yes. Confused, absolutely. But not terrified. There was something about Cole, something in the way he'd defended her in the church, in the way he'd given her privacy and expected nothing in return, that made her think maybe, just maybe, she'd be safe here. The door opened and Cole returned with full buckets, which he set by the fire. He moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, banking the coals, checking the door latch, preparing for night. "Lanterns by your bed," he said without looking at her. "If you need it." I usually turn in early. What time do we wake up? Dawn. Animals don't wait. Mara nodded, though Cole couldn't see her. She changed out of the wedding dress, struggling with the corset ties until Cole, without a word, came over and helped her loosen them, with the same impersonal efficiency he'd used to unsaddle a horse. Then he turned away while she pulled on a simple cotton shift from the trunk. "Good night," Cole said, moving to his own bed across the room. "Good night," Mara echoed. She lay down on the cot, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Through the window above her head, she could see the stars, thousands of them, blazing in the clear mountain air. The cabin creaked as it settled. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted. Mara closed her eyes, expecting sleep to be impossible. But exhaustion pulled her down like a tide, and within minutes she was drifting. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was strange and unbidden. "I made it through today. Tomorrow, I'll make it through tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that, until one day, maybe I'll make it all the way through to something like a life." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. And in the valley, in the small cabin by the creek, two strangers began their first night as husband and wife, each carrying secrets, each bearing scars, each hoping, in their own silent way, that somehow this impossible arrangement might lead to something neither of them dared name. Survival, perhaps. Or if they were very lucky, something more. Dawn came too early, announced by a rooster's crow that shattered the quiet dark like a gunshot. Mara jerked awake, disoriented, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the smell of wood smoke and pine, the sound of boots moving across a wooden floor. Then it all came flooding back. The wedding. The rejection. Cole Bennett. She sat up too quickly and her head spun. Through the gray pre-dawn light, she could see Cole already dressed, moving around the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He had his back to her, building up the fire from last night's coals. "You're awake," he said without turning around. "Good. Get dressed. Work starts in 20 minutes. "No. Good morning. No. How did you sleep?" "Just straight to business." Mara swung her legs off the cot and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in her body ached from yesterday's wagon ride, and her ribs were still tender from the corset. She fumbled through the trunk Cole had mentioned, finding men's shirts that smelled faintly of cedar. And something else. Lavender, maybe. They were too big through the shoulders, but serviceable. There were also trousers, rough denim that she'd never have been allowed to wear in town. Her mother would have called them indecent. Her mother would have said a lot of things. But her mother wasn't here. Mara dressed quickly, grateful that Cole kept his eyes on the fire. The trousers felt strange, the freedom of movement both liberating and uncomfortable. She'd spent her whole life in skirts and corsets, learning to take small steps, to make herself smaller. These clothes demanded something different. "There's coffee," Cole said, gesturing to a pot hanging over the fire. "And bread from last night. Eat quick." Mara poured herself a cup with shaking hands. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, black as tar, and twice as bitter. She forced it down anyway, needing the heat, and the wake-up more than she needed it to taste good. Cole ate standing up, one hand wrapped around his own cup, eyes already on the window and the lightening sky beyond. He looked like a man cataloging 1,000 tasks, prioritizing, planning. Mara wondered if he ever stopped moving, ever stopped thinking about the next thing that needed doing. "You know anything about chickens?" he asked. "A little. We kept some in town before my father died." Cole nodded. "Then you'll handle them. Feed, water, collect eggs. Coop's behind the cabin. Feed's in the barrel by the door, and don't let them bully you. They'll try." "Chickens will try to bully me." "Everything out here will try to bully you if you let it." Cole set his cup down and reached for his hat. "Animals, weather, land itself. You show weakness, it'll take advantage. You understand?" Mara thought about yesterday, about standing at that altar while Tobias Garrett called her disgusting in front of the whole town. About the years before that, the daily humiliations, the constant reinforcement that she was less than, wrong, unworthy. "I understand," she said quietly. Something flickered across Cole's face. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Good. I'll be in the south pasture mending fence. You need anything, ring the bell by the barn. I'll hear it." Then he was gone. the door closing behind him with a solid thunk that left Mara alone in the cabin with her cooling coffee and her racing thoughts. She stood there for a moment, frozen by the sheer weight of everything she didn't know. How to work a ranch, how to survive out here, how to be a wife to a man who didn't want a wife, just a work partner with legal documentation. Stop it, she told herself fiercely. You got through yesterday. You'll get through today. The chickens, at least, were familiar territory. Mara found the coop exactly where Cole said it would be, a sturdy structure built against the north side of the barn. Inside, a dozen hens roosted on perches, eyeing her with the suspicious intelligence that chickens somehow managed despite their bird brains. "Good morning," Mara said, feeling foolish for talking to poultry, but needing to hear a voice, even her own. "I'm Mara. I'll be taking care of you from now on." The hens clucked skeptically. Mara found the feed barrel and scattered a generous handful across the coop floor. The chickens descended like feathered locusts, pecking and shoving each other with surprising violence. Cole was right. They were bullies. But they were also just chickens, doing what chickens did, and there was something comforting in that simplicity. She collected 7 eggs, cradling them carefully in her borrowed shirt. They were still warm, smooth, and perfect in her palms. When was the last time she'd held something that felt like promise, like potential? Back in the cabin, she set the eggs carefully in a bowl and stood at the window, watching the sun climb higher. She could see Cole in the distance, a dark figure against the golden grass of the south pasture, working at something she couldn't quite make out. He moved with purpose, with certainty, like a man who knew exactly where he belonged. Mara envied that. She'd never belonged anywhere. Not really. Not in her mother's house, not in Black Hollow, not even in her own skin half the time. But maybe here, in this valley, with this silent man and these bully chickens, she could build something that felt like belonging. Maybe. The morning stretched on. Mara explored the cabin more thoroughly, taking inventory of supplies, memorizing where things were kept. She found a broom and swept the floor, found a wash basin and scrubbed the breakfast dishes. Small tasks, domestic tasks, the kind of work she'd been doing her whole life. But here, it felt different. Here, there was no one standing over her shoulder criticizing the way she held the broom or washed the cups. No one sighing dramatically about what a burden she was. Just the work itself, honest and simple. Around mid-morning, Mara noticed the garden plot Cole had mentioned yesterday. It was even more overgrown than she'd first thought. Weeds choking out the remains of what looked like it had once been a vegetable garden. Tomato stakes stood like grave markers over dead plants. A pumpkin vine had gone wild, sprawling across half the plot with nothing to show for it but yellowed leaves. Someone had cared for this garden once. Someone had planted it with hope and intention. But that someone was gone now, and the garden had died with them. Sarah, Mara thought, remembering the name that older man in the church had started to say before Cole cut him off. Sarah wouldn't want... Who was Sarah? Cole's wife? His sister? The questions burned, but Mara knew better than to ask. Cole had made it clear yesterday that some subjects were forbidden territory. Still, looking at that dead garden made Mara's chest ache. It seemed like such a waste. The soil was good here. She could tell by the way the weeds thrived. With some work, with care and attention, this plot could feed them through the winter. Could give them fresh vegetables instead of just dried beans and salt pork. Before she could second-guess herself, Mara was walking toward the barn, looking for tools. She found a hoe with a blade that needed sharpening but would do. Found gloves too big for her hands but better than blisters. And then, feeling like she was doing something momentous and possibly stupid, she started attacking the weeds. The work was brutal. The sun climbed higher, turning the valley into a furnace. Sweat soaked through Mara's borrowed shirt, dripping down her back, stinging her eyes. Her hands blistered despite the gloves. Her shoulders screamed. Her back felt like someone was driving hot nails through her spine. But she didn't stop. Every weed she pulled was a small victory. Every square foot of cleared soil was proof that she could do this, that she wasn't useless, that maybe Cole had been right when he said she was stronger than she looked. "What the hell are you doing?" Mara jumped, the hoe nearly flying from her hands. She spun around to find Cole standing at the edge of the garden, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Mara's voice came out as a rasp. She cleared her throat and tried again. "The garden was overgrown. I thought I could clear it, Maybe plant something before the season's too far gone. I didn't tell you to do that. I know. I just thought, did you finish with the chickens? Yes. Did you eat lunch? Mara blinked. She'd been so focused on the garden she'd completely lost track of time. No, It's past 2 o'clock. Cole's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. You've been out here for 4 hours in the full sun without water or food. That's how people die out here, Mara. Heat stroke, dehydration, plain stupidity. The words stung worse than the blisters. Mara felt heat rising in her face that had nothing to do with the sun. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. No, you weren't. Cole's voice was sharp as a whip crack. And if you're going to survive out here, you need to start. I can't watch you every second. You need to use your head. I said I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't matter if you're dead. They stared at each other across the half-cleared garden, both breathing hard. Mara felt tears threatening, from frustration, from exhaustion, from the unfairness of being yelled at for trying to help. But she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not again, not here. Cole must have seen something in her face because his expression shifted, the anger draining away to leave something that looked almost like regret. Come on, he said, his voice rough but no longer sharp. Get inside. You need water and food before you pass out. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to say she was fine, wanted to prove she wasn't as weak and stupid as he clearly thought. But her legs were shaking and her head was swimming, and she knew, with sudden clarity, that he was right. She'd pushed too hard, too fast, trying to prove something to a man who hadn't asked for proof. Inside the cabin, Cole poured her a cup of water from the bucket and watched until she drank it all. Then another, and another. The water was cold and sweet, and Mara could feel it working its way through her body like medicine. Sit, Cole ordered, pointing to a chair. Mara sat. Cole moved around the kitchen with efficient motions, slicing bread, pulling out cheese from the cold box, assembling a plate that he set in front of her without ceremony. Eat. Mara ate. The food tasted like dust in her mouth, but she forced it down, one bite at a time, while Cole stood at the window with his back to her. I didn't mean to worry you, Mara said finally, when the silence became unbearable. You didn't worry me. You sounded worried. Cole's shoulders tensed. I sounded angry. There's a difference. Is there? He didn't answer that, just kept staring out the window at something Mara couldn't see. She studied the line of his back, the rigid set of his shoulders, trying to understand this man who'd married her for reasons he wouldn't explain, and who yelled at her for working too hard. The garden, Mara said quietly. Did Sarah plant it? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cole went absolutely still, his hand curling into a fist against the window frame. Don't, he said. Just that one word, flat and final. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. Cole turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made Mara wish she could take the question back. Not anger now, but something worse. Something that looked like old pain buried deep but never healed. That garden's got nothing to do with you. Leave it alone. But I already started clearing it. Then stop. Let it go back to weeds. I don't care. Cole grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. I've got work to finish. You stay inside until the sun's lower. Drink more water. And next time you get an idea, ask me first before you half-kill yourself. He was out the door before Mara could respond, leaving her alone with her half-eaten lunch and the bitter taste of shame. She sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd thought she was helping, thought she was proving her worth, showing that she could contribute more than just cooking and cleaning, but instead she'd somehow managed to touch a wound she didn't know existed. Sarah. That name hung in the air like smoke. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her, Cole wasn't ready to talk about it. Maybe he never would be. Mara finished her lunch mechanically, then washed the dishes and put them away. The cabin felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. She wanted to go back outside, back to the garden, back to work that made her feel useful. But Cole had told her to stay in, and she'd already pushed him far enough for one day. So she stayed. She mended a tear in one of Cole's shirts that she found in a basket by his bed. She reorganized the pantry shelves, grouping like items together. She did all the small, invisible tasks that women did to make a house feel like a home, even though this wasn't her home and might never be. The sun was sinking toward the western hills when Cole finally came back. He looked exhausted, covered in dust and sweat, with a fresh cut on his forearm that he didn't seem to notice. "You're hurt," Mara said, standing up from where she'd been sitting by the window. Cole glanced at his arm like he'd forgotten it was there. "It's nothing, barbed wire." "Let me clean it." "I said it's nothing." "And I said, let me clean it." Mara surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "You can't work if that gets infected, and I assume you need to work, so sit down and let me help you." For a moment she thought he'd refuse, but then something in his face shifted, and he moved to the table and sat down with a sigh that sounded like surrender. Mara found clean cloth and water, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd patched up her share of wounds. Her father had worked in the mines. She remembered cleaning his cuts and scrapes when she was small, before the accident that killed him. She approached Cole carefully, like he was a half-wild animal that might bolt. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-30s probably, though hard living could age a man fast out here. "This'll sting," Mara warned, dabbing at the cut with wet cloth. Cole didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. Just sat there, stone still while she worked, his eyes fixed on some point past her shoulder. "You're good at this," he said after a moment. "I've had practice." "Your father?" "Before he died, yes. Mines are dangerous work." Mara wrapped a clean strip of cloth around Cole's forearm, tying it off with neat efficiency. "There. Keep it clean, and it should heal fine." "Thank you." The words were so quiet, Mara almost missed them. She looked up and found Cole watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more complicated. "You're welcome," she said. They stayed like that for a moment, close enough that Mara could see the darker flecks in Cole's brown eyes, could smell the honest sweat and leather scent of him. Then Cole stood abruptly, breaking whatever strange spell had fallen over them. "I'll get cleaned up," he said. "Then we should eat." Dinner was beans and bacon again. Mara was starting to suspect that was Cole's entire culinary repertoire, but she was too hungry to complain. They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against tin plates and the pop of logs in the fire. "Tomorrow," Cole said finally, pushing his empty plate away, "I need to ride into town for supplies. You'll come with me." Mara's stomach dropped. Black Hollow? Only town within 50 miles. Unless you want to go without coffee and flour for the next month. "Can't you go alone?" "I could." Cole's eyes met hers. "But you're going to have to face them sometime. Might as well be sooner rather than later." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to say she'd rather go without coffee and flour and every other supply in the world than face the people who'd laughed at her humiliation. But she knew he was right. She couldn't hide in this valley forever. "What time do we leave?" she asked. "Dawn. It's a 3-hour ride." 3 hours there, time in town. 3 hours back. An entire day of exposure, of stares, of whispers. Mara felt her appetite disappear, but she forced herself to finish her beans anyway. She'd need the strength. That night, lying on her cot in the darkness, Mara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tobias Garrett's disgusted face, heard the laughter echoing through the church, felt the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her like a physical thing. "You awake?" Cole's voice came from across the room, startling her. "Yes," Mara admitted, a pause. Then, "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "I know. They're going to talk, going to stare. Some of them will say things meant to hurt you." "I know that too." Another pause. Mara could hear Cole shifting in his bed, the rope springs creaking under his weight. "What that man said in the church," Cole said slowly, like he was picking his way through dangerous territory. "Tobias Garrett. You know it wasn't true, right?" Mara's throat went tight. "Which part?" "All of it. Any of it. You're not—" Cole stopped, and Mara could almost hear him fighting with the words. "You're worth more than what he saw. Worth more than what any of them see." The words hit Mara like a fist to the chest. She pressed her hand over her mouth, fighting back the sob that wanted to tear free. When had anyone last told her she was worth something? When had anyone seen her as anything other than a burden, a joke, a charity case? "Why did you marry me?" The question came out before Mara could stop it. The real reason, not because you saw me at the altar. You were in the back of the church before the ceremony started. You came there already knowing you might do this, so why?" Silence stretched so long Mara thought Cole wouldn't answer. Then, "I had a wife once, Anna, and a daughter, Emma. She was 3 years old." Mara's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak, afraid that any sound would make Cole stop talking. "There was a fever that came through 3 winters ago," Cole continued, his voice flat and distant. "Wiped out half the settlement up north where we were living. Anna got sick first, then Emma. I tried—" His voice cracked. "I tried everything, rode 2 days to fetch a doctor, but by the time we got back they were both gone." "Cole," Mara whispered, "I'm so sorry." "That garden you were working on today? Anna planted that. Our first spring here. She was so excited about it, planning what she'd grow, talking about how Emma would help her weed when she got bigger." A bitter laugh. "Emma never got bigger, and after they died I couldn't look at that garden, couldn't touch it, let it die because I couldn't face what it meant." Mara felt tears sliding down her face in the darkness. Not for herself this time, but for Cole. For the family he'd lost. For the pain he carried like a stone in his chest. "When I saw you in that church," Cole said, "standing there while that bastard humiliated you in front of everyone, you know what I saw?" "What?" "Someone who refused to break. You didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't make yourself smaller trying to please him. You just stood there and took it, and there was more strength in that moment than most people show in their whole lives." Cole's bed creaked again. I thought if you could survive that with your dignity intact, maybe you could survive out here. Maybe we could help each other survive. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Mara whispered. "It makes sense. I don't want a wife. Not the way most men want wives. I can't. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I never will be. I know. But I can offer you a partnership, a life where no one gets to tell you you're worth less than you are, where the work is hard but honest, and where you'll never have to shrink yourself to fit someone else's idea of what you should be." Cole paused. "That enough for you?" Mara thought about it, really thought about it. A partnership instead of a marriage. Hard work instead of cruelty. Freedom from her mother's constant criticism, from the town's judgment, from the cage of expectations that had squeezed the life out of her one day at a time. "Yes," she said firmly, "that's enough." She heard Cole release a breath he'd been holding. "Good. Then get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to test that resolve." But sleep didn't come easy. Mara lay awake listening to Cole's breathing steady and slow across the room, thinking about gardens and dead wives and the strange, broken man who'd saved her from a lifetime of humiliation. She thought about Anna and Emma, about the family Cole had lost, and understood now why the cabin felt so empty despite having 2 people in it. This wasn't a home. It was a memorial, a place where Cole had buried himself along with his wife and daughter, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And now Mara was here, sleeping in a dead woman's space, wearing her clothes, trying to navigate around the ghost that still haunted every corner of this valley. It should have terrified her, should have made her want to run back to town, back to her mother, back to anything familiar, even if it was cruel. But it didn't. Because somewhere in Cole's broken explanation, in his rough honesty, Mara had heard something that changed everything. He saw her, not as a burden or a joke or a body that took up too much space, but as a person with strength and worth. And maybe that was all she'd ever really needed, just one person who looked at her and saw something worth keeping. Dawn came too soon, announced by that same damned rooster. Mara dragged herself out of bed, every muscle screaming from yesterday's garden work. Cole was already up, making coffee, his face set in grim determination. "Eat quick," he said. "We need to get there early, before the crowds." Mara forced down bread and coffee, her stomach churning with dread. Cole packed supplies into saddlebags, empty flour sacks, a list written in careful block letters, money in a leather pouch. "You'll ride the mare," he said, leading Mara out to the corral. "Her name's Daisy. She's gentle." The mare was gentle, thankfully, because Mara's horseback riding experience consisted of exactly 3 childhood pony rides at a church fair. Cole boosted her into the saddle with impersonal efficiency, then swung onto his own horse, the big roan gelding from yesterday, with the ease of someone who'd been born in a saddle. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern hills, turning the valley gold and beautiful. Mara looked back once at the cabin, at the garden she'd started clearing, at this strange new life that was either her salvation or her grave. Too soon to tell which. The ride to Black Hollow took every bit of the 3 hours Cole had promised. They didn't talk much. Cole seemed lost in his own thoughts, and Mara was too focused on not falling off her horse to make conversation. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that some journeys were better made without words. As they descended from the hills into the flat plains where Black Hollow squatted in the dust, Mara felt her chest tighten. She could see the town in the distance, small and mean and exactly as she remembered. Her hands tightened on the reins until her knuckles went white. "Breathe," Cole said quietly. "You're not the same woman who left here 3 days ago." "I'm exactly the same." "No, you're not." Cole looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "That woman was alone. You're not alone anymore." The words settled over Mara like armor. Not much armor, maybe, but enough to straighten her spine and lift her chin as they rode into town. It was market day, which meant the streets were crowded with wagons and people buying and selling and gossiping. Mara felt eyes turning their way immediately, felt the whispers starting like wildfire. "That's her. Can't believe he actually went through with it. Wonder how long before he regrets." Cole's hand shot out and caught Mara's reins, pulling both horses to a stop right in the middle of Main Street. Before Mara could ask what he was doing, he dismounted and came around to her side. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "We'll walk from here." Mara took his hand and slid down from the saddle on shaking legs. Cole didn't let go. Instead, he tucked her hand firmly into the crook of his elbow, the gesture so deliberate and public that the whispers around them grew louder. "Keep your head up," Cole murmured. "Let them see you're not ashamed." They walked down Main Street like that, Cole tall and intimidating at her side, Mara fighting every instinct that told her to shrink and hide. People stared. People pointed. But no one said anything directly, not with Cole Bennett's dark eyes daring them to try. The general store was mercifully empty except for the proprietor, a thin man named Mr. Peterson, who'd always been more interested in money than gossip. He took Cole's list without comment, though his eyes kept sliding to Mara like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Heard you got married," Peterson said finally, measuring out flour. "That's right. To Mara Whitlock. Mara Bennett now," Cole corrected, his voice flat. "And if you've got a point, make it." Peterson raised his hands defensively. "No point, just making conversation. Congratulations and all that." "Much obliged." They gathered their supplies in tense silence. Mara helped carry sacks to the door, grateful to have something to do with her hands. Outside, the street was even more crowded than before, and Mara could see familiar faces in the crowd. There, Mrs. Henderson, who'd called her a burden when she was 12. Mr. Sykes, who'd laughed loudest at her humiliation. And there, standing outside the saloon with 3 of his friends, was Tobias Garrett himself. He saw them at the exact moment Mara saw him. His face went red, then white, then red again. He said something to his friends, and they all turned to stare. "Cole?" Mara whispered, her courage faltering. "Maybe we should—" But Cole was already moving toward Tobias with long, determined strides. Mara hurried after him, her heart in her throat. "Garrett," Cole said when they were close enough. His voice carried across the street, making heads turn. "Got something to say?" Tobias puffed up like a rooster. "As a matter of fact, I do. I want to know what the hell you were thinking, Bennett. Marrying her, when you knew what kind of woman she is." "What kind of woman is that?" "The lazy kind. The kind who can't control herself around food. The kind who'll eat you out of house and home and give you fat, stupid children." Tobias's friends laughed, emboldened by the crowd gathering around them. Cole's expression didn't change, but Mara felt him tense beside her like a coiled spring. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Too quiet, in that dangerous way that made smart people back down. "You finished? I'm just trying to help you out, Bennett. Save you some trouble before you're locked into—" Cole moved. 1 second he was standing beside Mara, the next his fist had connected with Tobias's jaw with a crack that echoed down the street. Tobias went down hard, sprawling in the dirt like a dropped sack of grain. The crowd gasped. Tobias's friends started forward, but one look from Cole stopped them cold. "Anyone else got something to say about my wife?" Cole asked the crowd. his voice still deadly quiet. Silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Cole extended his hand to Tobias, who was clutching his jaw and looking up with dazed, furious eyes. "Get up! I didn't hit you that hard." "You son of a—" "I said get up." Cole's hand didn't waver. "Stand up like a man and look at what you threw away." Slowly, reluctantly, Tobias took Cole's hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. Blood trickled from his split lip, and his jaw was already starting to swell. Cole turned to Mara. "Come here." Mara's legs felt like water, but she made them move. She walked over to stand beside Cole, feeling every eye in Black Hollow boring into her. "This woman," Cole said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is worth 10 of you, Garrett. She's got more courage in her little finger than you've got in your whole body. And I didn't marry her for land or cattle or any damn reward. I married her because I chose to. Because she's the kind of person who stands tall when small men try to break her. Because she's got strength you wouldn't recognize if it punched you in the face, which it just did, through my fist." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Tobias's face was purple with rage, but he stayed quiet. Cole wasn't finished. He looked at the gathered crowd, at all the people who'd watched Mara suffer for years without lifting a finger. "She works harder in a day than most of you work in a week. She doesn't complain, doesn't quit, doesn't expect anyone to carry her. And the fact that none of you saw that, the fact that you judged her on nothing but her appearance, says a hell of a lot more about you than it does about her." Then, while Mara stood there in shock and the whole town watched, Cole did something completely unexpected. He turned to her and held out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Mara stared at him. "What?" "Dance with me, right here." "Cole, there's no music." "Don't need music." His hand stayed extended, steady and sure. "Just need you to trust me." Around them, the crowd had gone absolutely silent. Mara could feel their shock, their confusion, their judgment. This was insane. This was public spectacle. This was Cole, asking her to dance in the middle of Main Street, daring the whole town to laugh while he showed them exactly how little their opinions mattered. Mara took his hand. Cole pulled her close, closer than was proper, closer than they'd ever been, and began to move. Not a waltz, not any dance Mara recognized, just a slow sway, back and forth, while the whole town watched. "Look at me," Cole said quietly. "Not at them. At me." Mara lifted her eyes to his and found them steady, certain, holding her gaze like an anchor. In that moment, with Cole's hand warm against her back and his eyes locked on hers, the rest of Black Hollow faded away. The whispers, the stares, the years of shame, all of it became background noise. "You're doing fine," Cole murmured. "Just fine." They danced for maybe a minute, maybe an hour. Mara couldn't tell. Time had stopped meaning anything. There was just this moment, this impossible moment, where a scarred rancher and a rejected bride moved together in the dust while the sun beat down and the whole world held its breath. When Cole finally stopped, when he stepped back and let her go, Mara realized something had shifted. The crowd was still staring, but differently now. Some faces showed anger, yes, but others showed something else: confusion, uncertainty, and on a few faces, just a few, something that might have been grudging respect. "We done here?" Cole asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. No one answered. "Good." Cole gathered up their supply sacks, loaded them efficiently onto the horses, then boosted Mara back into her saddle. Before mounting his own horse, he turned back to Tobias one last time. "One more thing, Garrett. You ever speak about my wife that way again? You ever even look at her wrong? And next time I won't pull the punch. Understand?" Tobias nodded mutely, still holding his jaw. Cole swung into his saddle and they rode out of Black Hollow at a walk, unhurried, heads high. Behind them, Mara could hear the explosion of voices as everyone started talking at once. But she didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, on the hills rising in the distance, on the valley that was starting, just starting, to feel like it might someday be home. They were a mile outside town before either of them spoke. "You didn't have to do that," Mara said quietly. "Yeah, I did." "He'll hate you now. The whole town probably will." Cole shrugged. "Already did, most of them. I don't come to town for friends." "Then why do you come?" "Supplies. And now," Cole glanced at her, "now to make sure they remember you're not alone." Those words again. "You're not alone anymore. Mara rolled them around in her mind, testing their weight, their truth. 3 days ago, she'd been the most alone person she could imagine. And now she had Cole Bennett. Not a husband in the traditional sense, not a savior or a hero or any of those romantic notions. Just a broken man with ghosts of his own, offering her a partnership built on hard work and mutual survival. It should have felt like settling. Instead, riding back toward the ranch with the afternoon sun on her face and Cole's solid presence beside her, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The days that followed their trip to Black Hollow fell into a rhythm that was equal parts grueling and oddly comforting. Mara woke before dawn to the rooster's crow, dressed in borrowed clothes that were starting to feel less foreign, and stepped into work that demanded everything she had. Cole was relentless but fair. He showed her once how to do something, how to mend a fence post, how to muck out the barn, how to check the horses for injuries, and then expected her to remember. He didn't coddle her when she made mistakes, but he didn't humiliate her either, just pointed out what went wrong and told her to try again. "Tighter," he said one morning, watching her wrap twine around a broken fence rail. "That'll come loose in the first strong wind." Mara gritted her teeth and unwound the twine, starting over. Her hands were covered in blisters that had burst and reformed into calluses. Her shoulders ached permanently. Her back felt like someone had taken a hammer to her spine. But she was getting stronger. She could feel it in the way her body responded to the work now. Less shock, more muscle memory. She could lift a water bucket without her arms shaking, could walk the length of the pasture without gasping for breath. "Better," Cole said, examining her fence repair. "That'll hold." 2 words of approval, delivered in his usual flat tone. But Mara felt them like sunshine breaking through clouds. The garden became her obsession. Despite Cole's warning to leave it alone, Mara couldn't help returning to it every spare moment she had. Something about that plot of dead earth called to her, maybe because it reminded her of herself. Something that had once been tended and valued, then abandoned to die. She cleared the weeds section by section, working in the early morning or late evening when the sun wasn't so brutal. Cole never mentioned it again, though she sometimes caught him watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. One evening, about 2 weeks after the trip to town, Mara was on her hands and knees pulling stubborn dandelion roots when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're wasting your time," Cole said. "Season's too far gone to plant anything that'll produce before frost." "I know." Mara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But at least it'll be ready for spring. And I found some late-season lettuce and radish seeds in the barn. Those might still work." Cole stood silent for a long moment, looking at the half-cleared plot. In the fading light, his face was harder to read than usual. "She wanted tomatoes," he said finally. "Anna said she'd never tasted a tomato as good as the ones her mother grew back in Pennsylvania. Spent that whole first spring planning where each plant would go, how she'd stake them up, what she'd make with them." Mara's hands stilled in the dirt. This was the first time Cole had voluntarily mentioned Anna since that night in the cabin. "She sounds like she loved growing things," Mara said carefully. "She loved a lot of things. Making plans, singing while she worked. Emma," his voice caught. "Emma had her smile. Same exact smile, like sunshine breaking through. I'm sorry I'm working in her garden. I should have asked." "No." Cole shook his head. "No, you were right to clear it. Letting it die didn't bring them back. Just made everything else die too." He paused. "If you want to plant those seeds, I'll help you. Tomorrow, after the morning chores." Mara looked up at him, surprised. "You will?" "Yeah, might as well do it right if you're going to do it at all." The next morning, true to his word, Cole appeared at the garden with tools and a bucket of composted manure from the barn. Together they worked the soil, breaking up the hard-packed earth, mixing in nutrients. Cole showed her how to make straight rows, how deep to plant each seed, how much space to leave between them. They worked in silence mostly, but it was different from the tense quiet that usually hung between them. This felt almost companionable, like 2 people working toward the same goal instead of 2 strangers circling each other warily. "There," Cole said when the last seed was in the ground. "Water them light every evening. Should see sprouts in a week or so if the weather holds." "Thank you," Mara said, "for helping." Cole wiped his hands on his pants and looked at the neat rows they'd made. "Anna would have liked you," he said abruptly. "You got the same stubborn streak, the same refusal to quit even when you probably should." The words hit Mara square in the chest. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, just stood there beside him, looking at their work, feeling something shift between them that she couldn't quite name. As June faded into July, the work intensified. The heat became oppressive, turning the valley into a furnace by midday. Cole taught Mara to work early and late, resting during the brutal afternoon hours when even the animals sought shade. He taught her to ride properly, spending hours in the corral working with Daisy until Mara could mount, dismount, and control the mare without embarrassing herself. Her thighs screamed in protest at first, muscles she didn't know she had burning with each lesson. But Cole was patient in his way, correcting her posture, showing her how to move with the horse instead of fighting it. "You're thinking too much," he said one afternoon, watching her struggle to keep Daisy in a steady trot. "Stop trying to control everything and just feel the rhythm." "I don't know what that means." "Yes, you do. You just don't trust yourself yet." Cole stepped closer to the fence. "Close your eyes." "What?" "Close your eyes. Daisy knows what she's doing. Stop fighting her and just sit." It went against every instinct Mara had, but she did it. Closed her eyes and tried to let go of the white-knuckled grip she had on control. For a few seconds it was terrifying, the sensation of movement without sight, the fear of falling, of failing. But then something clicked. She could feel Daisy's rhythm beneath her, the 4-beat pattern of the trot. Her hips started moving with it instead of against it, and suddenly it was easier. Natural, almost. "There," Cole said, and Mara could hear the approval in his voice. "That's it. That's what I'm talking about." When she finally opened her eyes, she was grinning like a fool. Cole was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something almost like pride. "Again," he said. "This time, try a canter." The riding lessons became Mara's favorite part of each day. Not just because she was learning a skill, but because it was the one time Cole seemed to lower his guard completely. He loved horses in a way he didn't seem to love much else anymore. And watching him work with them was like seeing a different person, someone gentler, more patient, almost at peace. One evening, after a particularly good session, Mara worked up the courage to ask something that had been bothering her. "Why don't you have more horses? You've got the land for it, and you clearly know what you're doing." Cole was brushing down the roan gelding, his movements rhythmic and practiced. "Had more once, sold most of them after—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "After Anna and Emma died. Couldn't afford to keep them and didn't much care about breeding stock anymore. But you could start again, if you wanted to, maybe." Cole moved to the other side of the horse. "Breeding horses takes capital, time, energy. Don't have a lot of any of those to spare right now." "What if you had help?" Cole looked at her over the horse's back. "You offering?" "I'm just saying, I'm learning. I could do more than just the basic chores. And if we could build up a breeding program, sell good stock, that's years of work, Mara. Years of investment before you see any return." "So?" Mara surprised herself with the challenge in her voice. "We have years, don't we? This is supposed to be a partnership. Partners plan for the future." Something flickered across Cole's face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. He went back to brushing the horse, but Mara could see tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "I'll think about it," he said finally. It wasn't a no. Mara would take it. The garden seeds sprouted exactly when Cole said they would. Mara checked them obsessively, kneeling in the dirt each morning to count the tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. It felt like a miracle every time, life coming from what had been dead. She started keeping a list of things they needed, improvements that could be made. The barn roof leaked in 3 places. The chicken coop could be expanded. The fence around the corral needed reinforcing. Each task was a mountain of work, but Mara was learning that mountains could be climbed one step at a time. Cole noticed the list one evening when Mara left it on the table. He picked it up, scanning it with those dark, unreadable eyes. "This is ambitious," he said. "Too ambitious?" "Didn't say that." He set the list down. "But we can't do it all at once. Have to prioritize." "What's most important?" Cole thought for a moment. "Barn roof. Won't matter how many chickens we have or how strong the fences are if the barn collapses come winter. So we fix the barn roof." "We fixed the barn roof," Cole agreed. They started the next morning. Cole showed Mara how to safely climb up to assess the damage, how to pull away rotten shakes and fit new ones. The work was terrifying at first. Mara had never been good with heights, but Cole's steady presence helped. He never rushed her. Never made her feel stupid for being scared. "Hand me that shake," he said, pointing. "No, the longer one. There." They worked side by side in the blazing sun, replacing damaged wood piece by piece. Mara's hands blistered again, adding new injuries to old scars. Sweat poured down her back. Her muscles screamed. But there was something deeply satisfying about the work, seeing the problem and fixing it, making something broken whole again. "You're good at this," Cole said, examining one of her repairs. "Better than I expected." "Better than you expected, or better than most women could do?" Cole shot her a look. "Better than most people could do, man or woman. You've got steady hands and you pay attention to detail. Those matter more than strength." The compliment settled warm in Mara's chest. She ducked her head, focusing on the next section of roof. "My father taught me some carpentry before he died. He said good work was about patience, not power." "Smart man." "He was." Mara fitted another shake into place. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said you could tell a man's character by how he treated his tools and his animals." "And what do my tools and animals say about me?" Mara glanced at Cole, surprised by the question. He was watching her with what looked like genuine curiosity. "They say you're careful, thorough, that you don't take shortcuts even when no one's watching." She paused. "They say you're lonely, but you're trying not to be." Cole's expression shuddered. "That's so." "I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry." "No." Cole shook his head. "No, you're right. I am lonely. Been lonely since they died, but I'm—" He stopped, struggling with something. "I'm less lonely now than I was a month ago. That count for something?" Mara felt her throat tighten. "Yes, that counts for a lot." They worked in silence after that, but it felt different. Less like two people tolerating each other's presence, and more like two people actually building something together. The barn roof took 3 days to complete. When they finally climbed down on the third evening, both exhausted and filthy, Cole stood back to survey their work with critical eyes. "It'll hold," he said finally. "Good work, Mara." Those 3 words felt better than any praise Mara had received in her entire life. As summer deepened, Mara noticed changes in herself that went beyond muscle and calluses. She walked differently now, head up, shoulders back, no longer trying to make herself invisible. She spoke up when she had ideas or questions instead of swallowing her words. She was learning to trust her own judgment, to believe that her contributions mattered. Cole noticed too. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not desire exactly, but something like respect. Like he was reassessing her, recalculating her value. One afternoon, while they were repairing fence in the south pasture, a rattlesnake appeared from nowhere. Mara heard the warning rattle and froze, terror locking her muscles. "Don't move," Cole said quietly. He was 10 feet away, too far to help. The snake was coiled between Mara and safety, its flat head weaving back and forth. She could see the pattern on its back, the unblinking eyes. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Mara," Cole's voice was steady, calm. "There's a shovel to your left, 3 feet. Can you reach it without moving your feet?" Mara's eyes flicked sideways. The shovel was there, leaning against a fence post. She'd set it there herself 15 minutes ago. "I think so." "Don't think. No." "Can you reach it?" Mara stretched her arms slowly, fingers extending. The snake's rattle intensified. Her fingertips brushed the shovel handle. "I can reach it." "Good. Pick it up, slow and steady." Mara's hand closed around the worn wood. She lifted the shovel, every movement glacially slow. "Now what?" "Now you kill it." Cole's voice was matter-of-fact. "One quick strike right behind the head. You've got the angle. You can do this." "Cole, I've never—" "Doesn't matter what you've never done. Matters what you're going to do right now. You're not helpless, Mara, so stop acting like you are." The words hit like a slap. Mara felt something sharp and hot flare in her chest. Anger, maybe, or defiance. She'd been helpless her whole life, helpless against her mother's cruelty, against the town's judgment, against Tobias Garrett's rejection. But Cole was right. She wasn't that person anymore. Mara raised the shovel and brought it down in one quick, decisive motion. The blade caught the snake just behind the head, severing it cleanly. The body thrashed for a few seconds, then went still. Mara stood there shaking, the shovel still gripped in white-knuckled hands, staring at what she'd done. "Good," Cole said, walking over. He nudged the dead snake with his boot, making sure it was finished. "Clean kill. You did good." "I killed it." Mara couldn't quite believe it. "I killed a snake." "Yeah, and if you hadn't, it might have killed you. That's how things work out here. You protect yourself, or you die." Cole looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You're stronger than you think you are. When are you going to start believing that?" When was she going to start believing it? Mara looked at the dead snake, at her own hand still gripping the shovel, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd spent 23 years being told she was weak, useless, a burden. But in the last month she'd cleared a garden, repaired a barn roof, learned to ride, and killed a rattlesnake. Maybe weak wasn't what she was. Maybe it was just what she'd been told to be. "I'm starting to," Mara said quietly. Cole nodded, something like satisfaction crossing his face. "About damn time." That night Mara couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot listening to Cole's breathing across the room, thinking about everything that had changed. A month ago she'd been standing at an altar in a borrowed dress, being publicly humiliated. Now she was lying in a cabin she'd helped repair, her body strong from honest work, thinking about horse breeding programs and spring gardens. She thought about her mother, wondered if Martha ever thought about her. Probably not. Or if she did, it was only to resent that her burden had become someone else's problem. But Mara wasn't anyone's burden anymore. She was pulling her own weight. More than that, she was building something. With Cole, yes, but also for herself. A life that felt real and earned instead of borrowed and apologized for. "You awake?" Cole's voice came from across the room. "Yeah." A pause, then, "You did good today, with the snake." "You already said that." "I know, but I meant it. You didn't panic, didn't freeze. Just did what needed doing." Another pause. "Anna would have panicked, couldn't stand snakes, would have screamed and run, and probably gotten bit in the process." Mara held her breath, afraid that if she spoke, she'd break whatever spell was making Cole talk about his dead wife. "She was brave in other ways," Cole continued, "but not about snakes or spiders or anything that crawled, a sound that might have been a laugh. Used to make me check the whole cabin before bed every night, even after I'd already checked it twice." "That sounds sweet," Mara said carefully. "It was. She was." Cole was quiet for a moment. "But she's gone, and you're here, and you're different. Good different, strong in ways she wasn't. I'm not trying to replace her." "I know, but maybe—" Cole stopped, searching for words. "Maybe that's why this works. You're not trying to fill her space. You're making your own." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "Is that okay? Me making my own space?" "Yeah," Cole said quietly. "Yeah, it's okay." They didn't talk after that, but something had shifted again. Some wall had come down, just a little. Mara fell asleep feeling less like a stranger in this cabin and more like someone who had a right to be there. The next morning brought a surprise. Visitors. Mara was feeding the chickens when she heard horses approaching. Her first instinct was fear. Had someone from town come to cause trouble? But when she looked up, she saw two women riding into the yard. Cole emerged from the barn, his hand automatically going to his belt where he kept a knife. But he relaxed when he saw who it was. "Mrs. Fletcher, Sarah." He nodded to each woman in turn. "Wasn't expecting company." The older woman, Mrs. Fletcher apparently, was probably in her 50s, with iron gray hair and a face that had seen its share of frontier hardship. The younger one, Sarah, was maybe 20, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Hope we're not intruding," Mrs. Fletcher said, dismounting with practiced ease. "We heard you'd gotten married and thought we should come pay our respects. Welcome the new Mrs. Bennet proper-like." Mara felt panic flutter in her chest. These were the first visitors they'd had, the first people from the wider community she'd have to face. What if they'd heard about the wedding? About Tobias's rejection? What if— "Mara," Cole called, "come meet our neighbors." Mara set down the feed bucket and walked over, acutely aware of how she must look, covered in dust and chicken feed, wearing men's clothes, her hair falling out of its braid. "Mrs. Fletcher, Sarah, this is my wife, Mara." Cole's hand settled briefly on Mara's shoulder, warm and steadying. Mara, the Fletchers have the ranch about 10 miles west. Pleased to meet you, Mara said, offering her hand. Mrs. Fletcher took it with a firm grip, her sharp eyes assessing. But what Mara saw there wasn't judgment. It was curiosity, and maybe something like approval. Well now, Mrs. Fletcher said, you're not what I expected. Ma! Sarah looked horrified. I mean that as a compliment, girl. Expected some wilting flower based on the talk in town. But you've got workers' hands and you're dressed sensible. That speaks well of you. What talk in town? Mara asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Mrs. Fletcher waved a dismissive hand. Oh, the usual nonsense. Half the town thinks Cole's lost his mind, other half's waiting to see how fast you run back to your mother. But I told them all they were fools. Cole Bennett's got more sense in his little finger than most of them have in their whole heads. Ma's your biggest defender, Sarah said to Cole with a shy smile. She nearly took Mr. Sykes's head off when he suggested you'd been tricked into marriage. Cole's jaw tightened. Appreciate that, ma'am. No appreciation needed, just stating facts. Mrs. Fletcher turned back to Mara. We brought you some things. Vegetables from our garden, some preserves, a few yards of fabric Sarah's been hoarding. Figured you might need supplies, being new out here. Mara felt her throat tighten. That's very kind of you, thank you. Not kindness, just neighborly. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes softened. Frontier's hard enough without making it harder on each other. You need anything, advice, supplies, help with canning come fall. You send word. We're not so far we can't help. They stayed for an hour, drinking coffee and talking about weather and crops and the little dramas of frontier life. Sarah was full of questions about Mara's garden, offering tips on late-season planting. Mrs. Fletcher told stories about her early years homesteading that made even Cole crack a smile. When they finally left, Mara felt something she hadn't expected. Connection. These women hadn't come to judge or pity. They'd come to welcome, to help, to include her in the network of women who kept their families alive in this harsh land. They're nice, Mara said to Cole as they watched the Fletchers ride away. They are. Good people. Lost their son last winter to pneumonia. Hit them hard. But they keep going. Cole looked at Mara. Mrs. Fletcher doesn't like everyone. The fact that she likes you means something. What does it mean? Means you're doing all right. Means you're fitting in out here better than either of us expected. Cole started back toward the barn, then stopped. Means I was right about you. Right about what? Cole didn't answer, just kept walking. But Mara thought she understood. Right about her strength. Right about her ability to survive. Right about her being worth the gamble he'd taken in that church. The days continued to pass, each one adding new skills to Mara's growing repertoire. Cole taught her to shoot, spending a hot afternoon showing her how to handle his rifle, how to aim, how to control her breathing before pulling the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her on her back the first time, but by the end of the session she could hit a tin can from 50 yards. You're a natural, Cole said, genuine surprise in his voice. Most people can't shoot worth a damn their first try. Maybe I'm not most people. No, Cole agreed, looking at her with an intensity that made Mara's heart skip. You're definitely not. He taught her to read the weather, to spot the signs of an incoming storm in the clouds and the way the animals behaved. Taught her which plants were safe to eat and which would kill you. Taught her how to track deer, how to set snares for rabbits, how to smoke meat so it would last through the winter. Every lesson was another piece of armor, another tool in her growing arsenal of survival skills. Mara absorbed it all like dry earth soaking up rain, desperate to prove she could do this. She could be worthy of the partnership Cole had offered. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the hills. It had become a habit, this quiet time. Not talking, exactly, but not avoiding each other either. Just existing in the same space without tension. I've been thinking, Cole said suddenly, about what you said, about the horses. Mara turned to look at him, surprised. That conversation had been weeks ago. I think you're right, Cole continued. I think we should start building up the breeding program again. Not big at first. Maybe buy one good mare, see how it goes. But it's worth trying. Really? Mara couldn't keep the excitement out of her voice. Really? We've got the land, we've got the knowledge, and we've got... Cole stopped, searching for words. We've got time, like you said. Might as well use it building something instead of just getting by. Mara felt tears sting her eyes for the second time that day, but these were different. These were tears of recognition, of being seen and heard and valued, of being treated like a real partner instead of a burden or a charity case. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Going to be a lot of work, a lot of investment with no guarantee it'll pay off." "I'm not afraid of hard work." Cole looked at her, and in the fading light his expression was almost tender. "No, you're not. That's one thing I know for certain about you." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge. Mara thought about everything that had changed in 2 months. About the woman she'd been. Afraid, ashamed, certain she'd never be anything but a disappointment. And about the woman she was becoming, strong, capable, worthy of respect. She thought about Cole, too. About the walls he was slowly lowering, the grief he was learning to carry instead of being crushed by. About the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was a puzzle he was starting to solve. This wasn't love. Mara knew that. Love was probably too much to hope for, too dangerous to want. But it was partnership, genuine and growing stronger every day. It was respect and trust and the slow building of something that might, if they were very lucky, eventually become friendship. For now, sitting on this porch with this complicated, damaged man who'd saved her from a lifetime of humiliation, watching the stars emerge over a valley that was starting to feel like home. For now, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. August arrived with temperatures that turned the valley into a crucible. The creek ran lower than Cole had seen in years, and they had to dig deeper into the stream bed to find water for the animals. The garden struggled despite Mara's careful tending, and she spent evening hours hauling buckets from the spring to keep the vegetables alive. "It's too much work for what we'll get," Cole said one evening, watching her make yet another trip. "Let the lettuce go. Save your energy for what matters." "The lettuce matters," Mara said stubbornly, her back aching and her hands raw. "We planted it. We're going to see it through." Cole shook his head but didn't argue. He'd learned that Mara's stubbornness ran deeper than bedrock, and trying to change her mind once she'd said it was like trying to move mountains with bare hands. 3 days later, the lettuce gave them a full basket of crisp leaves that tasted like victory. Mara served them with dinner, a small salad dressed with vinegar and salt, and watched Cole's face as he took the first bite. "Well?" she asked. "It's good," Cole admitted. "Real good. Worth the work?" Every drop of water I carried. Something flickered in Cole's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or pride. "You're going to run this ranch better than I do by winter." "Not better. Different." Mara speared another leaf. "We're partners, remember? That means we each bring something the other doesn't have." "And what is it you think I don't have?" Mara considered him across the rough wooden table. "Hope, maybe. Or the belief that things can get better instead of just staying survivable." The words hung between them like smoke. Cole set down his fork, his expression difficult to read in the lamplight. "You think that's what I need? Hope? I think everyone needs it, even people who've lost everything." Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Hope's dangerous out here. Gets people killed when they count on things working out instead of preparing for the worst. And preparing for the worst gets people surviving but not living," Mara countered. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." Mara met his eyes steadily. "You survived the last 3 years, but you weren't living, not really. You were just going through motions, waiting for—" She stopped, uncertain how to finish. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know. Permission to move on? A reason to care about something again?" Mara's voice softened. "I'm not saying forget them. I'm just saying maybe it's okay to want more than just getting through each day." Cole stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Mara thought she'd pushed too far, crossed some invisible line. But he just walked to the window and stood there, staring out at the darkness. "Anna used to say something similar," he said finally. "Said I thought too much about what could go wrong and not enough about what could go right." A bitter laugh. "Then she died. Emma died. Kind of proved my point. Or proved that bad things happen regardless of whether you prepare for them or hope against them." Mara stood and moved closer, though she kept a respectful distance. "Maybe the question isn't whether to hope or not hope. Maybe it's what you do with the time you have either way. Cole turned to look at her, and in the lamplight his face showed every year of grief he'd carried. And what do you think I should do with my time, Mara Bennett? The use of her married name sent a strange thrill through Mara's chest. I think you should build something. Not just survive, but build. The horse breeding program, improvements to the ranch, a future that's worth working toward instead of just enduring. With you. It wasn't a question, but Mara answered anyway. Yes, with me. If you'll have me as a real partner, not just someone you're helping out of pity. I never pitied you, Cole said sharply. Not once. Pity's for people who can't help themselves. You've been helping yourself since the day you got here. Then treat me like it. Stop protecting me from the hard decisions. Stop shouldering everything alone because you think that's what you're supposed to do. Mara took a breath, steadying herself. I'm stronger than I was. You made sure of that. Now let me use that strength. Cole studied her for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, he nodded. All right. Tomorrow we go to the auction in Cedar Falls. There's a mare being sold, quarter horse, good bloodlines, proven breeder. If we're going to do this horse thing right, that's where we start. Tomorrow? Mara's heart jumped. That's a full day's ride. Day and a half. We'd need to leave before dawn, camp overnight, make the auction by noon the next day. Cole's eyes searched hers. You up for that? Yes, Mara said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. They left in the pre-dawn darkness, saddlebags packed with supplies for 2 days on the trail. Mara had never been on an overnight trip before, never slept anywhere but a bed, but the prospect excited rather than frightened her. This was adventure. This was the life she'd been building toward. Cole led them northeast, following trails Mara didn't even recognize as trails. They climbed out of the valley into rougher country, rocks and scrub pine, with hawks circling overhead and the occasional glimpse of deer watching from the tree line. How do you know where we're going? Mara asked as they navigated a particularly tricky descent. Been this way before. Brought Anna and Emma to Cedar Falls once, about 4 years back. There was a fair. Cole's voice was matter-of-fact, but Mara heard the weight beneath it. Emma wanted to see the horses. She was horse-crazy even at 2 years old. She sounds wonderful. She was. Cole was quiet for a moment. Look, there's something you should know. People in Cedar Falls knew Anna, knew about what happened. They're going to ask questions. What should I tell them? The truth, that you're my wife, that we're working the ranch together. That's all they need to know. He glanced back at her. You're not a secret, Mara, and you're not a replacement. You're just you. That enough? Yes, Mara said, and meant it. That's enough. They rode through the morning, stopping twice to rest the horses and eat jerky and hardtack from the saddlebags. The landscape changed as they traveled, the valley's gentle slopes giving way to harder country, all stone and sparse vegetation. But it was beautiful in its harshness, and Mara found herself understanding why people chose to live out here despite the difficulty. By late afternoon, Cole started looking for a campsite. He found a spot near a small creek sheltered by rocks and with good grazing for the horses. Together they set up camp, Cole showing Mara how to build a proper fire, how to arrange rocks to reflect heat, how to set up a sleeping area that would stay dry if it rained. You take the bedroll, Cole said, unloading gear. I'll sleep by the fire. We can share. I don't mind. Cole's hand stilled on the saddlebag. Mara, share the space, not... Mara felt heat rise in her face. I just meant it's cold at night, and there's no reason for one of us to freeze when we could both stay warm. As partners, practically speaking. A muscle twitched in Cole's jaw. Practically speaking. Yes. All right. Practically speaking, we share the bedroll, but you stay on your side and I'll stay on mine. They ate a simple dinner of beans warmed over the fire and the last of Mrs. Fletcher's bread. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and Mara was grateful for the fire's warmth. Above them, stars emerged in impossible numbers, a river of light flowing across the sky. I never get tired of that, Cole said, following her gaze upward. Out here, you can see what the world really looks like, not what buildings and smoke and civilization make it look like, just the truth of it. It's beautiful. It's honest. Cole poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up. That's what I like about ranching, about living out here. Everything's honest. An animal's either healthy or it's not. A fence either holds or it doesn't. A person's either pulling their weight or they're not. No room for pretending. Is that why you stayed after Anna and Emma died? Because it was honest? Cole considered the question. Partly. Also because leaving felt like abandoning them. Their graves are in that valley. Leaving would have meant leaving them behind. Mara's chest tightened. She hadn't known they were buried on the property. Hadn't known Cole passed their graves every day, carrying that weight with every step. Will you show me? She asked quietly. Sometime. Their graves. I'd like to pay my respects. Cole looked at her sharply, as if checking for mockery or manipulation. But he must have seen only sincerity, because he nodded. Yeah, when we get back. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. When it was time to sleep, they arranged the bedroll with careful formality, Cole on one side and Mara on the other, a good foot of space between them. But the night grew cold, and sometime in the deep hours before dawn, Mara woke to find herself curled against Cole's back, seeking warmth. She started to pull away, but Cole's hand caught hers. It's all right, he murmured, half asleep. Cold night. Stay. So Mara stayed, her forehead pressed against the broad expanse of Cole's back, his hand warm around hers. It wasn't romance. It wasn't desire. It was just two people keeping each other alive through a cold frontier night, the way partners should, but it felt like more. It felt like trust. They reached Cedar Falls by mid-morning the next day, riding into a town 3 times the size of Black Hollow. The auction was already setting up in a large corral near the center of town, with horses being paraded for inspection and men gathering to assess the livestock. Cole dismounted and helped Mara down, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary on her waist. Stay close. Auctions can get rough, and I don't want to lose you in the crowd. They walked through the corral together, Cole examining each horse with a critical eye. He pointed out flaws Mara would never have noticed, a slight hitch in a gelding's gait, scarring that suggested previous injury, teeth that indicated an animal older than advertised. There, he said finally, stopping in front of a chestnut mare with a white blaze. That's the one. The mare was beautiful, sleek and well-muscled, with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. Cole ran his hands over her legs, checked her teeth, watched her move. She's perfect, Mara said. She's close to it. Good conformation, healthy, about 6 years old. She's been bred before. Probably has a foal somewhere. Cole's expression was focused, calculating. She'll be expensive. How expensive? More than we should spend, but less than she's worth if we can breed her successfully. He looked at Mara. You sure about this? This is a big gamble. I'm sure. Are you? Cole smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually stern face. Yeah, I'm sure. The auction started at noon, with a crowd of ranchers and dealers packed around the corral. Mara stayed close to Cole as he'd asked, watching the rapid-fire bidding with fascination. The auctioneer spoke so fast she could barely understand him, but Cole seemed to follow perfectly, his hand rising at key moments to signal his bids. The chestnut mare came up in the 3rd round. Bidding started at $40 and quickly climbed. Cole bid $50, then $60, then $70. Another rancher across the corral kept countering, driving the price higher. Cole, Mara whispered, that's too much. Trust me, Cole said, not taking his eyes off the auctioneer. The price hit $90. The other rancher bid $95. Cole raised his hand. $100. A murmur went through the crowd. $100 was a fortune, more money than Mara had seen in her entire life. The other rancher shook his head and stepped back. Sold, the auctioneer called, to Cole Bennett for $100. Cole paid with cash he must have been saving for years, his face revealing nothing as he counted out the bills. The mare was led over, and Mara could see the tension in Cole's shoulders finally ease as he took the lead rope. She's ours, he said quietly, running his hand along the mare's neck. First step of the new breeding program. What do we name her? Mara asked. Cole looked surprised, like he hadn't thought that far. You choose. She's as much yours as mine. Mara studied the mare's intelligent eyes, her noble bearing. Hope, she said finally. Let's call her Hope. Cole's expression softened. Hope it is. They were preparing to leave when a woman's voice called out from the crowd. Cole? Cole Bennett? Cole turned, and Mara saw his face go carefully blank. A woman in her 40s was approaching, well-dressed in traveling clothes, with kind eyes and graying hair. Mrs. Patterson, Cole said with a nod. Didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. Mrs. Patterson's eyes moved to Mara, then to the wedding ring on her finger, then back to Cole. I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. You remarried? Yes, ma'am. This is my wife, Mara. Mrs. Patterson extended her hand, and Mara took it, feeling the weight of assessment in the older woman's gaze. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Bennett. I was a friend of Anna's. We grew up together back in Pennsylvania. I'm honored to meet you, Mara said carefully. Anna was a special woman. Losing her and little Emma, Mrs. Patterson's voice caught. It broke my heart, broke everyone's heart. I know, Cole said quietly. Broke mine too. Mrs. Patterson looked between them, something like approval in her expression. But life goes on, doesn't it? It has to. Anna would have wanted that for you, Cole. She loved you too much to want you frozen in grief forever. Cole's jaw worked. Yes, ma'am. And you, my dear, Mrs. Patterson turned to Mara. You have big shoes to fill, but something tells me you're up to the task. Take care of him. He's a good man, even if he doesn't believe it himself. I will, Mara promised, and meant it. They rode out of Cedar Falls an hour later, Hope following on a lead rope behind Cole's gelding. The sun was high and hot, but they made good time, both eager to get home. Mrs. Patterson seemed nice, Mara said after a while. She is. Was Anna's best friend growing up, moved west about the same time we did. Cole was quiet for a moment. She's right, you know, about Anna wanting me to move on. Anna wasn't the type to want someone mourning forever. What was she like, really like? Cole thought about it as they rode. Cheerful. Always singing, always finding something to be happy about even when things were hard. She could make friends with anyone. Animals, people, didn't matter. Emma was the same way. Could charm a snake if she put her mind to it. She sounds lovely. She was. But she also couldn't shoot, couldn't track, couldn't fix a fence to save her life. She was all heart and joy, but not much practical skill. Cole glanced at Mara. You're the opposite. All practical skill and determination, different kind of strength. Is that good or bad? It's just different. Not better or worse. Just different. Cole paused. But it's what I need now. What the ranch needs, so I guess in that way it's good. They camped again that night, this time with Hope grazing nearby. Mara fell asleep with Cole's hand wrapped around hers, the stars wheeling overhead, feeling more content than she could remember feeling in her entire life. The next morning brought them home to the valley, where everything looked exactly as they'd left it, but somehow felt different. This was theirs now, not just Cole's ranch where Mara happened to live, but their shared project, their future being built one decision, one investment, one day at a time. Cole showed Mara where Anna and Emma were buried that evening, as he'd promised. 2 simple wooden crosses stood in a grove of pines about a quarter-mile from the cabin, with wildflowers growing around them. I come here sometimes, Cole said quietly. Talk to them. Tell them about the ranch, about what's happening. Probably sounds foolish. It doesn't sound foolish at all. Mara stood before the graves, reading the names carved into the wood. Anna Bennett, beloved wife and mother. Emma Bennett, beloved daughter. Both taken too soon. I'll take care of him, Mara said softly, speaking to the graves. I'll take care of the ranch and the animals and everything you loved. And I'll try to make him remember that life is for living, not just surviving. I promise. Cole's hand found hers, squeezing tight. They stood there together as the sun set, 2 living people honoring the dead, making promises they intended to keep. The weeks that followed were consumed with preparations for Hope's future breeding. Cole built a separate corral for her, reinforced and secure. They researched bloodlines, planned which stallion to breed her to, calculated costs and potential returns. But they also found time for smaller things. Mara's garden flourished in the late summer heat, producing more vegetables than they could eat. She learned to preserve them, canning tomatoes and beans under Mrs. Fletcher's patient instruction during another visit. You're a natural at this, Mrs. Fletcher said, watching Mara seal jars with practiced efficiency. Most girls your age can't keep a garden alive, much less preserve enough to last winter. I had good teachers, Mara said, glancing at Cole, who was outside working with Hope. And a good partner, from what I can see. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes were knowing. Cole's different since you came, still grieving, still carrying that weight, but less like a man who's given up on everything. He's teaching me as much as I'm teaching him. That's how the best marriages work, honey. Not one person carrying the other, but both pulling together. Mrs. Fletcher wiped her hands on her apron. My Henry and I have been married 32 years. You want to know the secret? Please. Respect, not love. That comes and goes with the seasons, but respect. That's the foundation. You respect each other's strengths, forgive each other's weaknesses, and work toward the same goals. She looked at Mara seriously. You and Cole got that? Mara thought about it. About the way Cole listened to her ideas about the ranch. About the way she trusted his judgment on the horses. About the partnership they'd built through honest work and mutual reliance. Yes, she said, I think we do. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn in the air. The valley transformed, golden grass rippling in the wind, the trees along the creek starting to turn. It was beautiful in a way that made Mara's chest ache, the kind of beauty that couldn't last, that had to be appreciated in the moment because winter was coming. They spent a week cutting and stacking firewood for the cold months ahead, working from dawn to dusk to ensure they'd have enough. Mara's arms ached from swinging the axe, but she kept at it, refusing to quit before Cole did. You're going to hurt yourself, Cole said, watching her struggle with a particularly stubborn log. Then show me how to do it right instead of just watching me fail. Cole came over and positioned himself behind her, his arms coming around to adjust her grip on the axe. Mara was acutely aware of his presence, his chest against her back, his breath warm on her neck, his calloused hands covering hers. It's not about strength, Cole said, his voice low. It's about leverage and timing. Let the weight of the axe do the work. You're just guiding it. He helped her swing, and the axe bit deep into the wood, splitting it cleanly. Mara felt a rush of triumph. Like that? She asked, breathless. Exactly like that. Cole stepped back, leaving Mara suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. Try it on your own now. Mara swung again and again, finding the rhythm. Each successful split felt like a small victory, proof that she was learning, growing, becoming someone capable of surviving anything this land could throw at her. That night, exhausted from the day's work, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. But instead of the usual companionable silence, Cole spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, about hope, and about living instead of just surviving. Mara turned to look at him, surprised. You were right, Cole continued. I've been surviving for 3 years, but I haven't been living. Haven't let myself want anything because wanting hurt too much when it got taken away. He met her eyes. But you make me want things again. Want the horse breeding to succeed. Want the ranch to grow. Want... He stopped, something flickering across his face. Want things I'm not sure I'm ready to name yet. Mara's heart hammered in her chest. That's not a bad thing, Cole. Wanting things. Isn't it? Last time I wanted things, I lost everything. And if you never want anything again, you'll lose just as much, just slower. Mara reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not Anna. I'm not fragile or delicate or likely to be taken by fever. I'm sturdy and stubborn, and I'm going to be here tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to make it true. Mara squeezed his hand. And I can promise that whatever time we have, I'll spend it building something worth having. With you. Cole looked at their joined hands for a long moment. Then, slowly, he brought them up to his lips and pressed a kiss to Mara's knuckles. Brief, almost chaste, but charged with meaning. All right, he said quietly. Let's build something, Mara Bennett. Let's build something that lasts. And under the vast frontier sky, with autumn coming and winter waiting beyond it, 2 broken people chose to stop just surviving and start living instead. October brought the first frost, delicate crystals that turned the valley into something magical at dawn. Mara stood at the cabin window watching the sun transform ice into diamonds, marveling at how much had changed since that terrible day in the church 4 months ago. The woman who'd stood at that altar barely existed anymore, replaced by someone stronger, someone who belonged to this harsh, beautiful land. Behind her, she heard Cole moving around, building up the fire. They'd fallen into such easy rhythms now. She made coffee while he brought in wood. He fed the horses while she gathered eggs, their days choreographed by mutual necessity and growing comfort with each other's presence. "Going to need to make another supply run soon," Cole said, pouring himself coffee. "Winter's coming fast. We'll need flour, salt, ammunition. And I want to check on breeding prospects for Hope. Should we go to Black Hollow or Cedar Falls?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Rather go to Cedar Falls. Less gossip, less trouble. We can't avoid Black Hollow forever." "Can try." But there was resignation in his voice. They both knew he was right. They needed supplies closer than a day-and-a-half ride, and Black Hollow was the only option. 3 days later, they rode into town together just as the morning market was setting up. Mara sat straighter in her saddle than she had on that first humiliating trip, her head high, no longer afraid of the stairs. And there were stairs. The entire town seemed to stop and watch as Cole and Mara made their way down Main Street. But this time, the whispers had a different quality. Not quite respect, but not entirely mockery either. More like confusion, like Black Hollow couldn't quite figure out what to make of Cole Bennett's marriage 4 months on. They were tying their horses outside the general store when a familiar voice called out, "Well, if it isn't the happy couple." Mara turned to see Tobias Garrett approaching, his jaw fully healed but his pride clearly still wounded. 2 of his friends flanked him, and all 3 wore expressions that promised trouble. Cole's hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing the knife he kept there. "Garrett, you got something productive to say, or are you just making noise?" "I got plenty to say." Tobias stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to be confrontational, but far enough to avoid immediate violence. "About how you made a fool of yourself over damaged goods. About how the whole territory is laughing at Cole Bennett, who was so desperate he married the town charity case." Several people had stopped to watch, forming a loose circle around them. Mara felt her face heat, old shame trying to claw its way up her throat. But then Cole's hand found the small of her back, steady and warm, and the shame transformed into something else. Anger. "You finished?" Mara heard herself say, her voice carrying across the street. Tobias blinked, clearly not expecting her to speak. "What?" "I asked if you were finished, because I have some things to say too." Mara stepped forward, putting herself between Cole and Tobias. She felt Cole tense behind her, but he didn't pull her back. "Mara," Cole warned quietly. "It's all right," she said, not taking her eyes off Tobias. "I've been quiet long enough." She looked at Tobias Garrett, really looked at him, and saw him for what he was. Not the successful rancher who'd rejected her, just a small, insecure man who'd built his entire sense of worth on making others feel worthless. "You stood in that church 4 months ago," Mara said, her voice steady and clear. "And you called me disgusting, unworthy. You humiliated me in front of everyone I'd ever known, and you did it because you thought my appearance made me less than human." Tobias's face was reddening. "I had every right to refuse. You had every right to refuse respectfully, to back out of the contract like a decent person. What you didn't have the right to do was treat me like garbage." Mara took another step forward. "But you know what? I should thank you." That stopped Tobias cold. "What?" "I should thank you for showing me exactly what I was worth to people like you, because it made me realize I was never going to find my value in Black Hollow. I was never going to find it in my mother's house or in the opinions of people who'd already decided I was worthless." Mara's voice grew stronger. "I found it in myself, in the work I do every day, in the partnership I've built with a man who sees me as an equal, not a burden." She gestured to Cole, who stood watching her with an expression that made her chest tight. "Cole Bennett married me because he chose to, not for land, not for cattle, not out of pity or charity or any other reason you've convinced yourself must be true. He married me because he saw something in me that you were too blind and too cruel to see." Mara looked around at the gathered crowd. "And you know what the really sad part is? Most of you saw it too. You saw me working harder than anyone in this town, trying to prove I was worth something. But you couldn't get past what I looked like long enough to care." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Mara saw Mrs. Henderson look away, shame crossing her weathered face. "So go ahead," Mara continued, turning back to Tobias. "Keep telling yourself I'm damaged goods. Keep telling yourself Cole made a mistake. Keep laughing and making your jokes. Because while you're wasting your energy on that, I'll be building a life worth living. And 4 months from now, or 4 years from now, when you're still stuck in this town spreading poison, I'll be proving every single thing you said about me was wrong." She stepped back to Cole's side, her heart hammering, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Cole's arm came around her shoulders, solid and supportive. "She said it better than I could have," Cole said to Tobias, his voice quiet but carrying weight. "Now we're going to get our supplies and go home. You got a problem with that? We can settle it right here. Otherwise, I'd suggest you move along." Tobias looked like he wanted to say something, wanted to throw a punch, wanted to do anything to salvage his pride. But whatever he saw in Cole's eyes made him think better of it. He spat in the dirt and turned away, his friends following. The crowd began to disperse, people heading back to their business with the disappointed air of spectators denied a real fight. But as they did, something unexpected happened. An older woman, Mrs. Whitmore, who ran the boarding house, approached Mara with tentative steps. "Mrs. Bennett," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say, what you said took courage, real courage, and I'm sorry for my part in making you feel unwelcome in this town." Mara stared at her, speechless. "You're not the only one," came another voice. Mr. Peterson from the general store stepped forward. "I should have said something when Garrett tore into you at that wedding. Should have stood up for basic human decency. I didn't, and I'm ashamed of that." One by one, people approached. Not everyone. Plenty still walked away with disapproval on their faces. But enough people stopped to offer awkward apologies, stilted congratulations, or simple acknowledgement that what Tobias had done was wrong, and what Mara had done since was admirable. By the time they finished gathering supplies, Mara felt wrung out emotionally, but somehow lighter than she'd been in months. The weight of Black Hollow's judgment hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had shifted. She'd stopped carrying it on her shoulders and thrown it back at the people who'd created it. "You did good back there," Cole said as they loaded their supplies onto the horses. "Real good. I couldn't have done it without you, without knowing you had my back." Cole's hand covered hers on the saddle horn. "Always will. That's what partners do." They rode home in companionable silence, the autumn sun warm on their backs. But about an hour outside town, Cole pulled his horse to a stop. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his expression serious. "Something I should have told you months ago." Mara's stomach clenched. "What is it?" Cole dismounted and helped her down, then led her to a fallen log where they could sit. He took his hat off, turning it in his hands, clearly struggling with whatever he needed to say. "When I married you," he began slowly, "I told myself it was because I saw strength in you, because I respected how you handled that humiliation. And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth." "Cole, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "The whole truth is that I was drowning, had been drowning for 3 years, ever since Anna and Emma died. Every day was just existing, going through motions, and I'd convinced myself that was enough, that survival was all I deserved." Mara stayed quiet, sensing he needed to get this out. "Then I walked into that church and saw you standing there, and I saw myself. Saw someone who'd been told they were worthless so many times they'd started to believe it. Someone who was drowning in shame and grief and the weight of other people's cruelty." Cole finally looked at her. "And I thought maybe if I could save you, maybe I could save myself too." "Did you?" Mara asked quietly. "Save yourself? I don't know if I'd call it saved, but I'm living again, really living, not just surviving, and that's because of you." Cole reached for her hand. "You came to this ranch afraid and ashamed, and you transformed yourself into someone fearless, someone who stands up in the middle of Main Street and tells the whole town they were wrong about her. Watching you do that, it made me realize I could transform too, that I didn't have to stay frozen in grief forever." Mara felt tears sliding down her face. "You saved me too, you know. From a life of being my mother's burden, from never believing I was worth anything, from dying slowly in that town, crushed by shame. So we saved each other. I guess we did." Cole's thumb traced over her knuckles, his touch gentle. "There's something else. Something I've been feeling for a while now, but didn't know how to say." Mara's breath caught. "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, impossibly huge. Mara stared at Cole, searching his face for doubt or obligation, but found only honesty. "I know we started as a partnership," Cole continued. I know I said I wasn't looking for a wife in the traditional sense, but somewhere along the way, watching you work in the garden, watching you learn to ride, watching you become this incredible person, I fell in love with you. And I needed you to know that. Even if you don't feel the same way, even if you want to keep this just a partnership, I needed you to know. Mara's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Cole Bennett, are you really this blind? He blinked. What? I've been in love with you for weeks, maybe months. I didn't think you'd ever see me that way. Not after Anna. Anna was my past, Cole said fiercely. You're my present and my future. They're not the same thing, and I don't want them to be. Mara launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Cole caught her, holding her tight against his chest, his face buried in her hair. I love you, Mara whispered. I love your strength and your honesty, and the way you made me believe I could be more than I was. I love you, Cole said against her temple. I love your stubbornness and your hope, and the way you refused to stay broken. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hand coming up to cup her face. Can I kiss you? Really kiss you? Not like at the wedding? I'll be offended if you don't. Cole's lips met hers, and it was nothing like that brief, chaste kiss in the church. This was heat and need, and 4 months of growing feelings finally allowed to surface. Mara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring years of loneliness and shame and desperate hope into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. We should probably get home, he said, his voice rough. Probably, Mara agreed, but neither of them moved. They sat there on the fallen log for a long time, holding each other, letting the reality of what they'd admitted settle over them like a blessing. The sun moved across the sky. The horses grazed nearby. And two people who'd been broken in different ways discovered they'd somehow managed to make each other whole. The ride home felt different, charged with awareness, with possibility. Cole kept glancing at Mara like he was seeing her for the first time, and Mara couldn't stop smiling. When they finally reached the valley, the cabin looked different too. Not just a place she lived, but home. Truly home, in a way nowhere had ever been before. They unloaded supplies together, working in their familiar rhythm, but with new touches. Cole's hand on her waist as he passed her, Mara's fingers trailing across his shoulders. Small intimacies they'd denied themselves for months, finally allowed. I need to tell you something else, Mara said as they finished putting things away. About my mother. Cole turned to look at her. What about her? She sent a letter 3 weeks ago. I didn't mention it because I didn't know what to do with it. Mara pulled the envelope from where she'd hidden it in the trunk. She wants to visit. Says she wants to see how I'm doing. Do you want her to visit? Mara thought about it. 3 months ago, she would have said no immediately, too afraid of her mother's judgment. But now? Yes, she said slowly. I want her to see what I've become. I want her to see that everything she said about me was wrong. Then we'll invite her. Cole took the letter. But she comes as a guest, not as someone who gets to criticize or judge. She treats you with respect or she leaves. Those are my terms. Our terms, Mara corrected. We're partners, remember? Our terms, Cole agreed with a smile. They sent the invitation the next day, and 2 weeks later, Martha Whitlock arrived on the afternoon stage. Mara watched her mother climb down from the coach, taking in the worn dress, the haggard expression, the way Martha's eyes swept the valley with barely concealed disdain. Mara, Martha said, looking her daughter up and down, you look different. I am different. Mara didn't move to embrace her mother, didn't shrink under her gaze, just stood there, straight and strong, Cole solid beside her. This is quite remote, Martha continued, glancing at the cabin. I suppose you've managed to make do. More than managed, Cole said, his voice carrying a warning edge. Mara's built a good life here, worked hard for it. Martha's eyes flicked to Cole, reassessing. Whatever she saw there made her adjust her tone. Of course, I'm sure she has. The first evening was awkward. Martha clearly didn't know what to make of this new version of her daughter, confident, capable, unafraid. She kept trying to slip back into old patterns of criticism, but each time Mara calmly corrected her. The cabin's rather small, isn't it? It's exactly the size we need. Efficient and well-maintained. I'm surprised you're doing such rough work. Surely a woman shouldn't. A woman should do whatever work needs doing. I've learned skills here I never could have in town. By the second day, Martha had stopped trying to criticize and started actually observing. She watched Mara work in the garden, harvest vegetables, preserve food, watched her handle the horses with confidence, watched her work alongside Cole as a true equal, their partnership evident in every interaction. On the third morning, Martha found Mara in the garden and stood watching for a long moment before speaking. "I was wrong about you," she said finally. Mara looked up, surprised. "I spent your whole life telling you that you weren't good enough, that you needed to be smaller, quieter, less." Martha's voice was tight. "I told myself I was helping you, preparing you for a world that would judge you harshly, but I was just making it worse." "Why?" Mara asked quietly. "Why did you treat me that way?" Martha was silent for a long moment. "Because I saw myself in you. Every flaw I hated about myself, I saw in you. And instead of loving you through it, I tried to fix you, change you into someone who wouldn't suffer the way I suffered." She looked at Mara with tears in her eyes. "But I just made you suffer more." Mara felt her own tears coming. She'd wanted this apology for so long, had dreamed of her mother finally seeing her worth. But now that it was happening, she found it hurt almost as much as the years of criticism. "I'm sorry," Martha whispered. "I'm so sorry for every cruel word, every disappointed look, every time I made you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough. You were always more than enough." Mara stood and faced her mother fully. "I forgive you," she said, "but I need you to understand something. I'm not the girl who left Black Hollow 4 months ago. I'm not going back to being small or quiet or apologizing for taking up space. This is who I am now. I can see that." Martha reached out tentatively, and when Mara didn't pull away, took her daughter's hands. "And I'm proud of who you've become. Even if I had nothing to do with it, maybe especially because I had nothing to do with it." They stood there in the garden, mother and daughter, healing wounds that had festered for years. It wasn't complete healing. That would take time, if it ever happened at all. But it was a start. That evening, Martha sat on the porch with Mara and Cole, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. "He's a good man," Martha said quietly to Mara while Cole was inside getting coffee. "And he loves you, really loves you. I can see it in how he looks at you." "I love him too." "I'm glad." Martha paused. "I'm glad you found someone who sees what I should have seen all along." When Cole returned with coffee, they sat together in companionable silence. And watching her mother and her husband coexist peacefully, Mara felt another piece of her past settle into place. Martha left 3 days later, but not before hugging Mara tightly and promising to write. It wasn't the perfect reconciliation from fairy tales, but it was real and honest, which was better. November brought the first real snow, transforming the valley into a winter wonderland. Mara woke one morning to find Cole already up, watching the snow fall with a strange expression. "What is it?" she asked, joining him at the window. "Emma's birthday would have been today. She'd have been 6 years old." Cole's voice was quiet, but not broken. "Anna and I always made snow angels with her on her birthday. Started the tradition when she was 2. Mara took his hand. "Do you want to make some now? To remember her?" Cole looked at her, surprise and gratitude mingling on his face. "You wouldn't mind?" "Why would I mind honoring your daughter's memory?" They went outside into the fresh snow, still falling in fat, lazy flakes. Cole showed Mara how to make the perfect snow angel, and they made 3. One for Emma, one for Anna, one for them. Not to replace the family Cole had lost, but to honor it while making room for the new family they were building. Afterward, they stood looking at their work, Cole's arm around Mara's shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding, for not being threatened by my past. Your past made you who you are. I wouldn't want to erase it even if I could." Mara leaned into him. "Besides, Anna and Emma brought you here, to this valley, where eventually you'd find me. In a strange way, I owe them my happiness." Cole pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "They'd have liked you, both of them." Christmas came quietly. They didn't have much, no town celebration to attend, no family to visit. But Mara made a special dinner with vegetables from her garden, and Cole surprised her with a gift he'd been carving for weeks, a beautiful wooden box with her name carved into the lid. For your seeds, he said, and whatever else you want to keep safe. Mara's gift to him was simpler but no less meaningful, a sketch she'd worked on in stolen moments, showing the valley as she saw it. Their cabin, the barn, the horses grazing, the mountains in the distance, home, captured in charcoal and paper. It's perfect, Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. You've got real talent. I just drew what I love. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they didn't sleep in separate spaces. Cole held Mara close in the bed that had once been his alone, and she fit against him like she'd always belonged there. I love you, he murmured into her hair. I love you too, Mara whispered back. So much it scares me sometimes. Scares me too, but I'm tired of being afraid. Cole's arms tightened around her. I'm tired of holding back, protecting myself from hurt. I'd rather risk the pain and have you, than play it safe and have nothing. Then let's stop playing it safe, Mara said. Let's build the biggest, messiest, most ambitious life we can imagine. Let's breed horses and expand the ranch and have everything we want instead of just what we think we deserve. Everything we want? Mara turned to face him, her hand coming up to cup his scarred cheek. Everything. A thriving ranch. A house full of horses. Maybe someday... She hesitated. Someday what? Someday children. If you want them. If you're ready. Cole went very still. Children, he repeated carefully. Not now. Not for a while, but someday. If you think you could do that again, be a father again. Mara searched his face. I understand if you can't. If losing Emma made that impossible. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Mara could see him working through it. The fear, the grief, the possibility. I think, he said finally, I think I'd like that. Someday. With you. His hand moved to rest on her stomach, warm and gentle. I think Anna would have liked that too. Me living fully again. Choosing happiness instead of just surviving. Mara kissed him then, pouring every ounce of love and hope and promise into it. And Cole kissed her back with equal intensity, both of them choosing each other, choosing life, choosing to be brave enough to want everything. The winter passed in a blur of work and intimacy and growing plans. They spent evenings by the fire sketching out improvements to the ranch, arguing good-naturedly about whether to expand the barn or build a separate stable, whether to focus on breeding horses or diversifying into cattle. We should do both, Mara insisted. We can't afford both. Not yet, but in a few years with the right planning. Cole laughed, pulling her into his lap. You're going to make us the biggest operation in the territory, aren't you? Damn right I am, and you're going to help me do it. Yes, ma'am, Cole said, kissing her soundly. Whatever you say. Spring came early, melting the snow and bringing new life to the valley. Mara's garden, prepared carefully the previous fall, burst into early growth. Hope, bred to a prize stallion from Cedar Falls, was visibly pregnant and due to foal in late summer. And one morning in April, Mara woke feeling strange. Different. She lay there for a moment trying to identify the feeling before it hit her. Cole, she whispered, shaking his shoulder. Cole, wake up. He came awake instantly, years of ranching making him a light sleeper. What's wrong? You hurt? No, I think I'm pregnant. Cole went absolutely still. You think? I'm 2 weeks late, and I've been feeling odd. And Mara pressed her hand to her stomach. I just know, the way women know. Cole sat up fully, his hand covering hers on her belly. A baby, he said, his voice full of wonder and terror in equal measure. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Mara asked, suddenly afraid. Is this too soon? Too much? Too much? Cole's laugh was shaky. Mara, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. A baby, our baby, that's not too much. That's everything. He kissed her, gentle and reverent, his hand still pressed to her stomach where their child grew. The news spread slowly through their network of neighbors. Mrs. Fletcher was delighted, immediately offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Other ranchers' wives stopped by with gifts and wisdom, welcoming Mara fully into the community of frontier mothers. Even Martha sent a letter, her joy evident in every line, promising to visit when the baby came. Summer arrived with heat and hard work. Hope foaled in late July, producing a beautiful colt they named Promise, and Mara's belly grew, her body changing in ways both miraculous and terrifying. "You're beautiful," Cole said one evening, watching her struggle to put on boots that no longer fit over her swollen feet. "I'm huge." "You're growing our child. That's the most beautiful thing in the world." Mara looked at her husband, this man who'd married her out of mutual desperation and somehow transformed their partnership into the deepest love she'd ever known, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not a good mother? What if—" "Hey," Cole took her face in his hands. "You're going to be an amazing mother. And yes, things could go wrong. Life out here is hard and uncertain and sometimes cruel, but we don't let fear stop us from living anymore, remember? We choose to be brave. We choose to hope." "When did you get so wise?" "When I married a stubborn woman who refused to let me wallow in grief." Cole kissed her forehead. "You taught me how to hope again, Mara. Now I'm just returning the favor." The baby, a girl they named Grace, was born in early October during the first snow of autumn. The birth was hard, attended by Mrs. Fletcher and 2 other neighbor women, with Cole pacing anxiously outside until Mara's screams finally gave way to a baby's cry. When he was finally allowed in, he found Mara exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle with wonder in her eyes. "Grace Anna Bennett," she said, looking up at Cole. "After your mother and your first daughter. If that's all right." Cole couldn't speak. He just knelt beside the bed, touching the baby's impossibly small hand with his scarred, work-rough fingers, tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect," he finally managed. "You're both perfect." Mara reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "We did it. We built something that lasts." "We did," Cole agreed, "and we're going to keep building, bigger and better and more hopeful every year." As winter settled over the valley again, Mara stood at the cabin window holding Grace, watching Cole work with the horses in the corral. Behind her, the cabin was warm and full, food she'd preserved from the garden, wood they'd cut together, baby clothes sewn by neighbor women who'd become friends. She thought about the woman she'd been a year and a half ago, standing at an altar in a borrowed dress, certain her life was over before it had really begun. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, capable, loved, a mother and partner and rancher in her own right. The transformation hadn't been magic. It had been choice, repeated every single day. The choice to work hard, the choice to believe she was worthy, the choice to let Cole see her, truly see her, and to see him in return. The choice to hope when hope seemed impossible. And standing there in the cabin that was truly home, holding the daughter she and Cole had made together, Mara Bennett finally understood something her mother and Black Hollow and all the cruel voices of her past had tried to keep from her. She had always been worthy. She had always been enough. She had always deserved love and respect and a life built on her own terms. It had just taken coming to this valley, meeting this broken man, and choosing to be brave for her to finally believe it. Outside, Cole looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his scarred face into something beautiful. And Mara smiled back, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She'd been the bride nobody wanted, the woman rejected at the altar, humiliated in front of everyone she'd ever known. But she'd become the woman who chose herself, who built a life worth living, who loved and was loved in return. And in the end, that was worth more than all the acceptance Black Hollow could have ever offered. Grace stirred in her arms, and Mara looked down at her daughter's perfect face, already seeing hints of Cole in her features. "You're going to grow up knowing you're worthy," Mara whispered to the baby. "You're going to grow up strong and brave and certain of your value, because I'm going to make sure you never doubt it for a single day." Cole came in from the cold, stamping snow off his boots, bringing the scent of winter and horses and honest work with him. He crossed to Mara and wrapped his arms around both her and Grace, his chin resting on the top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Mara said. "How far we've come, how much we've built, how grateful I am for every single day, even the hard ones." "Me too." Cole's arms tightened. "I love you, Mara Bennett, more than I thought I could love anything again." "I love you too," Mara said. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would, for giving me a chance to become who I was always meant to be." "Thank you for the same," Cole said quietly. for bringing me back to life, for making this valley feel like home again instead of a tomb. They stood there together as the snow fell outside and the fire crackled inside, 3 generations healing, the ghosts of Cole's past finding peace, the living building their future, and a new life just beginning her journey. The bride nobody wanted had become the woman who had everything, not because someone gave it to her, not because she was rescued or saved or carried, but because she fought for it, earned it, built it with her own scarred hands and stubborn heart. And standing in that cabin in the valley she'd learned to love, surrounded by the family she'd helped create, Mara finally understood the greatest truth of all. She hadn't needed Black Hollow to validate her worth. She hadn't needed Tobias Garrett's acceptance. She hadn't even needed Cole's love, though she was grateful for it every single day. All she'd ever needed was to believe in herself, to choose herself, to know, bone deep and certain, that she was worthy of every good thing life could offer. And now, finally, she did. The story that had started with humiliation and rejection had ended with love and triumph and a life built on solid ground. Not a fairy tale. The work was too hard, the struggles too real for that. But something better, something true, something that would last through every season, every challenge, every joy and sorrow yet to come. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white. Inside, a family held each other close. And in Mara's heart, the last shadow of shame finally, completely